Are there any constituency statements by honourable members? The member for Curtin.
Thank you. Last Saturday, my monthly community catch-up was at St Bridget's Bar in Doubleview. Many of the issues raised by constituents at this session related to intergenerational equity and housing. I heard perspectives on the effectiveness and fairness of monetary policy as a tool for managing inflation, reforming our tax system so as not to penalise effort, the pros and cons of shifting more of the tax burden to GST, and a lot about housing. The event was attended by homeowners, mortgage holders and renters, new Curtin residents and people who have been there forever. I heard from a young man who'd just bought his first house and an older couple who bought theirs when interest rates were at 17%. The thing that struck me was that the issues raised were long-term, deep reform issues. People were not asking about short-term handouts. They want to live in a country where everyone has somewhere to live and everyone can aspire to home ownership. Various housing ideas were floated on Saturday. Taxing vacant property, limiting foreign purchase of residential properties while we're in a housing crisis, limiting short stay accommodation and rethinking negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions. People in all circumstances can see that it's not sustainable for a home to cost 8 times the median income as it does now, when 20 years ago it was half of that. Homeowners have not complained as the policy settings from both sides of politics have seen their house value increase over the last 20 years. But there's now a gradual realisation that there are significant economic and social consequences of housing being out of reach for the next generation. In my earlier Curtin housing forums, our community identified our major housing issues and then had a discussion with some experts about a range of solutions proposed by community members. We agreed that we need to think of housing as being about homes, not about investments. We need to do density well. We need different branches of government to cooperate so policies are pulling in the same direction. We decided that federal government needs to incentivise build to rent, tax vacant dwellings, incentivise downsizing, redesign negative gearing and prioritise key trades in immigration. State governments need to review stamp duty, streamline approvals, strengthen renters' rights, limit short stay accommodation and increase supply of social and affordable housing, directly or via developer requirements. None of these solutions will single-handedly fix the problem, but communities like mine are ready for a clear-eyed discussion about what housing means in Australia, across party lines and across generations, to work out what is fair. This will take some political courage. The major parties must look beyond the next election to the intergenerational problem that we've collectively created. What I see in my community is that Australians are ready for this conversation.
Thank you. The member for Hotham.
Deputy Speaker, the NDIS is making an incredible difference to the lives of people right across my electorate of Hotham. There's lots of reasons why I'm proud to be a Labor Party member, and the NDIS is absolutely one of them. It took a Labor government to build this amazing scheme, which beforehand saw people with disability in our country getting terrible treatment, poor life opportunities, and importantly, participating in a kind of geographic lottery where your life outcomes as a person with disability depended almost entirely on where you lived in Australia. Now, NDIS is answering the call of these problems, and our government is committed to making it stronger than ever. We were very lucky recently when the Honourable Bill Shorten MP came to my electorate to speak to people who are directly affected by this scheme. Minister Shorten gave us a really large amount of his time. He was incredibly sensitive to the needs of my constituent, and actually while he was there was able to solve a whole lot of problems for people who raised ones with him. The forum had some of the highest engagement I've seen in the entire time I've been the member for Hotham. And I wanted to talk to you about two of the stories of people with disability in my electorate who are affected by this scheme. The first involves an important outcome that was achieved. My office has been working with two wonderful Hotham constituents, Laura and her daughter Jess. At the forum, Jess stood up and talked very bravely about the life-changing impact NDIS has had on her life as someone living with a disability that's complex and uncommon. What's incredible is that her mum, Laura, has exactly the same condition, but she was facing hurdles in getting access to the NDIS. Now, Laura came to the forum to be heard. She was then able to get connected with NDIA staff who could help her, and she messaged my office last week saying, "I've received amazing news. My application's been approved. We're all in total disbelief and cannot stop crying. Happy tears, of course." A beautiful story. I'm thrilled that my team was able to play a small part in this life-changing support for Laura and her family. I want to tell a quick story too about the impact the NDIS can have on someone's life. A local, Denise, shared the story of her brother, and she says in her own words, "Before the NDIS, people like my brother had no access to speech pathology after school, and now he has access to speech pathology through the NDIS and an electronic communications device. This is a life-changing thing for a sociable guy who's only ever communicated with or through family. Last Friday night, he ordered fried rice independently in a restaurant." What an amazing story, Speaker. I really want to thank my incredible community for welcoming Minister Shorten, and I want to say to all the people in Hotham who are affected by disability and their families, we are fighting for you. Labor built this scheme. We are going to get it on track and make sure that it delivers good outcomes for Australians. That's exactly what they deserve. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. The member for Riverina.
Mobile phone connectivity is imperative for regional communities to continue to thrive. In recent days, my office has been receiving much correspondence from residents in and around Ardlethan and Camara to express their concerns about what they say is a degradation of mobile phone reception over recent years in particular. They are rightly concerned about this and the shutdown of the 3G network, which has been delayed until the 28th of October to ensure as many people as possible can make their systems compliant. The communities in the Ardlethan area need to know that I'm hearing their concerns, and I'll do absolutely everything in my power to ensure mobile connectivity in the region is improved. And there has been a further degradation of service availability. I've been in contact with Telstra. They say they are working to upgrade the service to improve connectivity. Chris Taylor, the Telstra Regional Manager ACT in Southern New South Wales, and Coolamon Shire General Manager Tony Donoghue, we've been on the phone discussing this issue. It's impacting locals, and I'll certainly take this up directly with the Communications Minister. Telstra said that it intends to upgrade the tower in the community to fix some of the issues associated with the poor reception being experienced. Not good enough that people have to get on top of silos to try to make a call, particularly if that call is 000. And with the harvest coming up, this is simply not good enough. Now, the Mobile Black Spot program, which started as a coalition government initiative, it does invest in telecommunications infrastructure to improve mobile coverage and competition across Australia. It's an important program. Under the Black Spot program, rounds 1 to 7, the government's commitment has generated total investment of more than $1 billion. It has delivered up to 1,400 new mobile base stations across Australia. And when the coalition was in government, Riverina benefited from the program with rounds 1 to 5 having seen 22 towers installed. And they were at Bajerabong, Billamari, Bumbaldry, Coltower, Darby's Falls, Dernasia, Goolagong, Gemalong, Kurawatha, Ladysmith, Monteagle, Mount Macdonald, Maringo, Narradin, Noonbina, Old Wagga South Road, Temora West, Trungley Hall, Wannabadgery, Waroo, with Ali, Woodstock. I appreciate there are problems in Euron Creek. I appreciate there are problems in the Ardlethan and Camara area. I will fight hard to make sure that we improve the services there, and they have the same services that are available to people in capital cities. But I was concerned, of course, with the improving mobile coverage round 6, where the only seats that received mobile coverage towers were in Labor seats. And all well and good if you're in those Labor seats, but this has to be fair. This has to be equitable. This has to be across the board, and it wasn't simply good enough that they just had a colour-coded spreadsheet and it was all red, all Labor. Mobile phone connectivity for regional people, they deserve better than that.
Thank you. The member for Haslup.
I was shocked and deeply saddened to hear the news of my dear friend Sarah Carter's sudden passing earlier this month. I came to know Sarah shortly after being elected to this place, as I prepared to embark on a parliamentarian Save the Children learning tour to Kenya in December 2022. Very few people could have coordinated this work, and Sarah did it with her whole being. Her vibrancy, sense of humour and passion, she carried our motley delegation and united us for a common cause. With the extraordinary relationships she had developed, Sarah enabled us to see the critical and often life-saving work being undertaken by Hiruma Health Facility, the World Food Programme, UNHCR, Gakuma Refugee Camp, the Fred Hollows, Save the Children's Accelerated Learning Program at Kalamooch, the Red Cross and Opaha Facility for people affected by HIV. Throughout the visit in Kenya, Sarah was an essential guiding presence, and I reflect on that visit, on Sarah's work and the $15 million increase in funding commitments we achieved. Do they know? No backs to their chairs, they proudly answered questions. Where is Sarah from? Mothers line the hall for free health checks for their babies, hope from poverty. Stigma unattached, runway modelling drag queens, AIDS-free, safe and loved. Slums on rubbish tips, proudly home to enterprise, a future backed in. Refugees respected, food grown, water harvested, partnering models peace. Arduous, dusty roads, the villagers grapple with climate change, subsistence living. Fear, drought, isolation. Sarah focuses the spotlight. No one turns away. The politics of it, the cold-hearted truth of it, complacency exposed. But with gentleness, kindness, no judgment at all, we enter Sarah's world. The pathway to change, equality, prosperity, happiness, the want to see change. No courage needed, just open to a perspective that with much we give. Sarah built the bridge, created trust without exploitation, strangers welcomed in. Will they know the news? Will they know the results created? How it's forever shifted. Sarah's legacy grows. In sorrow we look for glimpses in all the souls touched. She lives for all those suffering, hoping Sarah would come their way. It is now with us. We will heed your call, optimism, fairness, truth through our friend Sarah. Sarah's leadership, love, laughter, determination achieved our mission. Sarah was taken from us for far too young, yet at the same time no one can say that she hadn't lived a life of great service to her own community in Melbourne, where she served as mayor, and to a global community where she saw the need. I, and I know many others here, miss her.
I thank the member. The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday's Daily Telegraph highlighted the wind drought plaguing our energy system. Industry experts are deeply worried that without a mix of energy sources, power in people's homes, across small business in manufacturing will just go out. The Albanese Labor government's all eggs in one basket renewables only approach is taking Australia for a ride, and it is surely having its toll, particularly on manufacturers in Western Sydney. It isn't hard to realise that when you rely solely on the wind blowing all the time and the right amount of sunlight every day to power the energy grid, it will just become an increasingly huge problem. We need 24/7 baseload power. We need gas. We need renewables, and we need nuclear. We need to see renewables flourish alongside keeping our gas industry going and developing nuclear power stations across the country for energy stability and security. So many of our domestic manufacturers, particularly in Western Sydney, rely on gas to power their businesses and to make their Aussie-made products. We're seeing record numbers of manufacturers closing on this Labor government's watch. In fact, manufacturing insolvencies has tripled since the last election. It is a disgrace. These small, medium and large-scale manufacturers need cheaper power prices to survive in this current economic climate. In my Western Sydney community, a steel manufacturer in Emu Plains, right in my electorate, recently told me their gas bill had gone up almost 40% since Labor took office in 2022. A defence contractor and manufacturer in Jemison Town said their bills were up 100%. They looked into the government's Solar for Business scheme, but it was not feasible for their business. They said it doesn't matter how many solar panels we put on the roof, we can't power our industry with solar panels. And in fact, the structure of our roof just won't hold these solar panels. We need gas. I also have a gym in Penrith which has had their energy bills double. Small business need a leg up, not a small $325 handout, which goes nowhere near paying the real cost of the energy they need to create products and to operate. We saw recent closure statistics of businesses and they were dire for Western Sydney. Last week, we had Creditor Watch's most recent update of its business risks index, which noted 90% of Australia will see an increase in the number of business failures in the year to come. From this data, Western Sydney is one of 2 of the hardest hit regions across Australia. If the Albanese government does not think this has to do with energy prices, they surely have their heads in the sand. We need gas, we need renewables, we need nuclear to secure our energy future, and we need to be backing industry across Western Sydney.
The member for Reid.
Earlier this year, I received a handwritten letter from 10-year-old Marcus Zhang, and here is part of that letter. I am writing to you for your help to build a soccer home ground for the Newington community. Our school soccer team won the PWSA Championship in 2023. However, we are facing a significant problem that is hindering our growth and enjoyment of this wonderful sport: the lack of a dedicated soccer field. Currently, we have to play, practice and compete at other suburbs' home ground. This is a huge disappointment for all of us. It is a stress and pain for parents to drive to other suburbs for soccer training. The traffic is also terrible. Having a soccer field is not only a want, but a dire need. I met with Marcus, along with his mum Michelle and his younger brother Flynn, in my office, and I got to hear firsthand how much he loved playing soccer and how much he loved his club, the Newington Gunners. And they invited me down to meet his team when the soccer season started. And I was very happy to take up that invitation. Along with the state member for Parramatta, Donna Davis, we went down to watch Marcus's team play on a Saturday in May. We met with the president of the Newington Gunners, Reuben Gurry. He and other members of the club had been advocating for a new home ground since they lost their home almost 5 years ago. There were plans to upgrade Newington Reserve, but those plans had stalled. With Donna Davis and Councillor Patricia Prosiv, we pushed the council to prioritise an upgrade to Newington Reserve. And we are happy to announce the council has approved the $17.5 million upgrade for Newington Reserve. This funding was provided by the City of Parramatta Council and the New South Wales State Government. The upgrade will include a full-size and mini-size soccer field, sports pavilion building and spectator seating, barbecues and outdoor exercise equipment. Work on the reserve is expected to begin in March next year, so it may not be completed in time for the soccer season in 2026, but I'm hoping the Newington Gunners will be playing at their home ground for the 2027 season. I want to thank Reuben Gurry, members of the Newington Gunners who have been advocating for a local home ground. But I wanted to particularly thank Marcus Zhang for writing to me to make me aware of this issue and for advocating for it. You've also shown other young people that they can achieve great results for the community if they speak up. Marcus, you are a remarkable young man and a soccer superstar. Thank you.
Thank you. The member for Flinders.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't often stay up late to watch Q&A on the ABC, but last night I made an exception to catch an important national and indeed local debate about social media and its impact on our society, and particularly on young people. It featured 2 women I have worked closely with in the last 2 years. Frances Haugen, the US-based Facebook whistleblower who recently came to my electorate and met with young people in a secondary school to talk about their social media use, and Alice Dawkins of Reset Tech, with whom I've done some work on rabbit holes and radicalisation effects of algorithms and auto-recommender systems. Last night's show followed an article published in News Corp papers earlier in the day, which told us just how embedded social media is in our children's lives. It revealed that nearly half of all 10 to 15-year-olds spend 2 hours a day just on TikTok. Almost half of 7 to 9-year-olds use the platform X, formerly known as Twitter. 7-year-olds on Twitter, a platform we know is riddled with misinformation, hate and easy access to pornography. And it also told us that kids in their early teens spend on average 93 minutes a day on Snapchat. Where do they find time for school? Dr. Jean Twenge is a professor of psychology at San Diego State University, and in 2017 she produced the first full body of academic work on the impact of social media on the generation growing up with smartphones in their hands, the generation she termed iGen. In her book of the same name, Twenge showed heavy social media use is linked to higher rates of anxiety, depression and loneliness. It creates less opportunity for face-to-face interaction, resulting in feelings of isolation and disengagement from high interaction activities like parties or sport. Children are reading less because slow books which require imagination and reflection are far less dominating of the attention than bright and funny 15-second bites of video. And children are taking much longer to grow up. They live less independent lives and delay taking on elements of adulthood like getting a job, getting their driver's licence, going on dates and moving out of home. Her subsequent book, Generations, released last year, further sought to explain generation and societal change by examining the impact of technology on our lives over the last 100 years. And there she found evidence of even greater mental health decline among those with heavy social media use and higher incidence of polarised views and echo chambers, and the greater resistance to discordant views and values. Twenge will be speaking at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas at UNSW in Sydney this weekend, and I look forward to hearing her and meeting her at this event. The Joint Parliamentary Committee on Social Media in Australian Society, on which I serve, gives us the opportunity to ask the right questions about social media's impact on children, including their brain development, and on adults and our social cohesion and our national security, and until now, our vibrant and robust democracy.
The member for Kingston.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, the Albanese Labor government is not only delivering now, but delivering into the future. And of course, one of the ways they're doing that is through investing in South Australian roads and infrastructure. And the investment in roads are really nation building and actually builds on the investment in my electorate and in South Australia that the previous Labor government invested in. Back in 2008, the federal Labor government extended the rail extension from Noarlunga to Seaford, and now the Labor government, both state and federal, are doing it again with a $15.4 billion to the Torrens to Darlington project, the biggest infrastructure project that South Australia has ever seen. Of course, this is the final stage of the long-awaited north-south corridor, which really connects the southern suburbs to the rest of Greater Adelaide, both to the city and, of course, to the northern suburbs. Of course, it connects the Southern Expressway, which was built under the Liberal Party that went one way. Yes, you heard that right. It was a road that changed direction in the middle of the night. Of course, it took a Labor government to rebuild that road and make sure it went two ways. And now the Southern Expressway will connect up southern suburbs residents when this project is done to the city and, as I said, the northern suburbs. When completed, the corridor will connect the southern suburbs to the city via a non-stop route bypassing 30 sets of traffic lights from the start of the Southern Expressway to the end of the Torrens to Darlington tunnel, providing a much safer and faster commute than ever before. And of course, the southern suburbs of Hallett Cove and Trott Park and Shido Park won't be left out as they had been under the Liberal Party, with the Labor government committing both state and federal to the on-off ramp on Majors Road, a really significant investment that will ensure that people in those suburbs will get access to this non-stop corridor. Of course, this will create approximately 5,500 jobs a year, with 90% of the labour to be undertaken in South Australia. Already 30 local businesses have registered their interest as subcontractors, and over 600 jobs for apprentices and trainees have been committed to. Of course, it's not only these very large projects that we are investing. 22 local road projects through the Roads to Recovery and Special Local Roads Program have been invested in as well. And whether it is small infrastructure, big infrastructure, the Albanese Labor government is delivering.
Thank you. The member for Fairfax.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I've stood in this chamber on many an occasion and proudly boasted about the Sunshine Coast as a lifestyle capital, as the most entrepreneurial region in Australia, and by far the greatest place to bring up a family, all of which is true. As a result of such characteristics, you've seen a bursting population. It's bursting at the seams. And I've frequently been in this place debating issues of infrastructure, that we need to keep infrastructure ahead of the population curve to keep building it. But I stand today to talk about another issue which has become more and more pressing, and that is the issue of housing. The fact that people simply cannot find a home, and those who do have a home are struggling more and more amidst this cost of living crisis. A report was tabled only this week by the Commonwealth Bank of Australia and also the Australian Regional Institute. Now, this was a report that looked at the movement of people between metro areas and regions, and what it showed was the Sunshine Coast is by far the most popular destination, representing 14.1% of that net migration, of that movement. Now, on one hand, I'm proud of the fact that more and more people want to come to the sunny coast. I don't blame them. It's what attracted me to the area. But the impact we are seeing on the ground due to poor public policy around a lack of housing is having a very real human impact. Now, what bore this out was a cost of living forum that I hosted only a couple of weeks ago with Senator Jane Hume. And we heard from organisations who are on the front line, dealing with those who are struggling most, many of whom simply cannot afford the rent. They cannot afford to have a roof over their head. Many of whom are simply not eating for fear that they can't pay for their rent. I mean, rentals alone on the Sunshine Coast have increased by around 27% just over the last 12 months. People are doing it tough. And as we heard, as we walked the beat around the Sunshine Coast together with the Senator, is the government has no solutions to this problem. If the government has done anything over the last year, it is to get rid of a minister who wasn't performing in the hope that a new minister would start doing the job. We will continue to press the case. This is pressing for the sunny coast, and we will not stop.
Thank you. The member for Greenway.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the recess, I had the opportunity to be out and about in the community, and specifically in Glenwood and Stanhope Gardens only recently. And as you would know, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's rare that you get constituents coming up to you with a single local issue that is of such concern to them that you have residents literally lining up to tell you their views on something, to agree with the person beforehand, and are clearly very sincerely impacted and concerned about an issue. This is exactly what is happening in Glenwood and Stanhope Gardens when it comes to the New South Wales Planning Department's rezoning proposal. In particular, in Glenwood, that I obviously know very well, the streets around Glenwood and the entry and egress for the suburb mean that residents are stuck in traffic jams even as soon as they leave their own driveways. This is an issue that is occupying forums such as the Glenwood Community Group. It's one that has been raised consistently with my office, and I know the office of my state counterpart, the member for Riverstone, Warren Kirby. And I think it's important that we be very clear. Addressing the critical housing shortage is a responsibility of all levels of government. As someone who came from local government, I can tell this chamber that North West Sydney has been and continues to do the heavy lifting when it comes to housing supply in Sydney. In New South Wales, we know that there is a desire to increase housing supply in areas that already have schools, roads and hospitals in place, and that is an important priority of the New South Wales State Labor Government. But through its proposed rezoning policy, known as the TOD, or the Transport Oriented Development State Environment Planning Policy,
The New South Wales Department of Planning wants to rezone Stanhope Gardens and Glenwood for high-rise and mid-rise apartments. Now, the reality is that North West Sydney Growth Corridor cannot cope with unsupported urban sprawl. And for over a decade, the former Liberal state government presided over an explosion of housing in my electorate without the urban planning and the critical infrastructure that's needed for growth. This will have a negative impact on the lives of existing and future residents. I've had residents writing to me concerned about the lack of school places and describing the rezoning as a disaster if no appropriate road infrastructure is in place. Now, because of your support in our advocacy, the department has agreed to an extension on the consultation period. I've launched a petition calling for Stanhope Gardens and Glenwood to be removed from the proposal, and I encourage all concerned constituents to sign this and to know that I will continue advocating on their behalf on this important issue.
Thank you. In accordance with Standing Order 193, the time for members' constituency statements has concluded. And unless anyone is seeking the call, we will take a short suspension and resume when I resume the chair in a moment.
For resumption of debate on the second reading and on the amendment moved by the member for Hume.
Before the debate is resumed on this bill, I advise the Federation Chamber that in the House it has been agreed that a general debate be allowed covering the bill, the Taxation, Multinational, Global and Domestic Minimum Tax Imposition Bill 2024 and the Treasury Laws Amendment, Multinational, Global and Domestic Minimum Tax Consequential Bill 2024. The original question was that this bill be now read a second time. To this, the Honourable Member for Hume has moved as an amendment that all words after that be omitted with a view to substituting other words. The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member, or do I need to do, sorry, do I need, yeah, and I call the member for Fraser.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. So I'm pleased to rise today to speak in support of this bill, the Taxation, Multinational, Global and Domestic Minimum Tax Bill 24. I would note from the outset that this is one of a package of 3 bills which together enact a 15% global minimum tax and domestic minimum tax for multinational enterprises operating in Australia with an annual global revenue of 750 million euros or greater, which is approximately $1.2 billion Australian. And there are other bills as part of this package which relate to capital thinning and also which relate to greater transparency across jurisdictions. I think it's important to set the context here, which is that multinationals have, in the post-World War II period, risen in importance in the global economy, which I think on balance is a positive. It reflects increasingly sophisticated supply chains. It reflects increasingly integrated global economies. And I think that the rise of multinationals has reflected a broader trend towards greater sophistication in the global economy, greater integration, greater specialisation, and that this in turn has enhanced productivity growth. But what it's also led to in terms of each economy's capacity to protect its tax base is that increasingly domestic economy governments, national governments, are facing up against companies that are increasingly able to shift their profits, to shift the underlying activities, to shift the underlying profit-generating activities in ways that often aren't particularly transparent. And this occurs through a range of mechanisms. For example, very large multinational organisations can shift interest payments
between different entities and different jurisdictions in such a way that can often materially reduce their taxation burden. They can undertake transfer pricing in ways that arguably in many instances don't reflect the underlying economic activities that are being undertaken in different jurisdictions. And we see this quite often when large multinational organisations might pay very little tax in one jurisdiction, which has high notional tax rates, and substantially more economic activity is attributed to jurisdictions, often very low population base jurisdictions, often jurisdictions with very low overall economic activity, but where there might be more favourable tax treatment. This is often undertaken in ways which are incredibly complicated and not transparent. And this has raised questions across the whole of the OECD and, in fact, I'd say the global economy about ways in which we might try and counteract some of these measures, particularly the ones which are artificial, particularly the ones which only exist to try to reduce the tax burden. And I would say that this is becoming particularly difficult in an era of digitalisation, in an era where some of our most high productivity companies, some of the companies that are operating in the social media world, in the world of the internet, where they are increasingly able to make judgments, able to make rulings around where the economic activity is occurring, so as to attribute that to a jurisdiction in a way where taxation often drives that. There's often not any particularly obvious way in which to attribute where the economic activity of some of these highly digital companies occur. We see this, for example, with social media platforms. We see this with search engines, where it might be that the activities of that company are wholly or largely attributed to a particular jurisdiction because that's perhaps where the algorithm itself is deemed to operate. But that doesn't necessarily lead to a particularly sensible or satisfactory outcome in terms of that company paying taxation where its customers connect with that company. This, I believe, comes down to a set of very tricky questions around how to value intellectual property, around how to decide where the activities of a company occur, where it might be that there's a range of different people connecting, but through an algorithm or through an entity that exists in a different jurisdiction altogether. So that's by way of context that we are facing, I believe, an increasingly challenging environment in terms of trying to attribute taxation to entities that are multinational, that are highly productive, yet where it's not at all obvious at times how to attribute any particular activities or any particular interactions between that company and a consumer with a particular jurisdiction. Now, the base erosion and profit sharing program out of the OECD is one response to that, and that's a program which has a whole series of initiatives falling under it, including minimum tax arrangements in a whole range of economies, including greater transparency, a whole range of measures that are aimed at an international tax regime that taxes more transparently and frankly more fairly, where taxes fall more naturally in jurisdictions where the economic activity is occurring, where there is less incentive for some jurisdictions to go out on a limb with extremely low tax rates simply to attract companies attributing a high share of their activity to that jurisdiction. Now, profit shifting hurts Australia. It hurts many advanced economies, but a lot of economic studies have shown that profit shifting, in fact, hurts developing countries the most. There have been a number of studies by the World Bank. There have been a number of studies by the OECD showing that profit shifting is bad for many national governments, but many developing countries struggle to lift their already vulnerable and fragile tax bases in the face of these kinds of activities. But certainly Australia is not immune, and Australia is one of the OECD countries that I would argue can benefit from a more sensible, a more sound international set of arrangements. So the BEPS actions have many components, as I said: minimum taxation arrangements, moving taxation arrangements across major OECD economies in a joint manner so that we are all moving together, but also taking into account the fact that there are certain sectors where this is particularly a challenge. Digital companies where, as I mentioned, intellectual property is very much an issue, the difficulty of measuring the value of that, but also the difficulty of attributing different actions to different jurisdictions. So these bills will provide for a global minimum tax that will enable Australia to apply a top-up tax on a residential multinational parent or subsidiary company where the group's income is taxed below 15% overseas. And it will also provide for a domestic minimum tax which will enable Australia to apply a top-up tax for any low-taxed domestic income before a foreign country would otherwise take that tax under the new rules. So the floor on tax competition offers Australia important benefits. First, it provides it reduces the incentive for multinationals to shift profits away from Australia to low-tax jurisdictions. And as I said, that is occurring at the moment in many instances in situations where there is no reason for that profit shifting other than what can be described as an artificial mechanism to reduce tax. It is in many instances, it has nothing to do with any kind of sound or rational or policy-based attribution of the company's activities between jurisdictions. This will also improve the competitiveness of smaller domestic businesses in Australia due to the reduced tax advantages of multinationals. So in addition to it being important in terms of supporting the government's tax base, it also reduces an unfair competitive disadvantage for smaller and medium local companies, many of whom might be trying to move up that productivity ladder, many of whom might be trying to become globally competitive themselves. So that is extremely important in terms of both the government's tax take, but also in terms of the level playing field within our own economy. And so by implementing a global and a domestic minimum tax, it will reduce the corporate tax rate differential between Australia and low tax jurisdictions, making Australia a more attractive place to invest in. So this will, as I mentioned, give effect to the global anti-base erosion rules that have been set out by the OECD and agreed and finalised by the OECD Inclusive Framework, which is now a network of 145 member jurisdictions. I believe that one of the key elements of this is that jurisdictions move together as much as possible on the key elements of this. Only by doing that, only by joint action can we take away the incentive for countries to continue to undercut each other. The government intends to finalise subordinate legislation in relation to these bills in the form of ministerial rules, which will be necessary for these bills to operate effectively. These rules will build upon the framework established by the bill, setting out various computational and administrative provisions necessary to give effect to the global and domestic minimum taxes. Enacting this bill is estimated to increase receipts by some $370 million over the 5 years from the 22-23 financial year. So it's a material amount of revenue. But as I said, in addition to protecting the government's revenue, there is an important levelling of the playing field with respect to how multinationals are taxed, or some multinationals are taxed versus how domestically based companies are taxed. And many of those domestic companies themselves are trying to build more of a multinational profile. This is both about economic efficiency and it's about fairness. The company tax rate is really, in a sense, a fairly modern part of the modern economy. In Australia, our company tax rate was introduced in 1915, and it was introduced at a low rate back then. I think that the initial company tax rate in the United States might have been around 1%. It increased in Australia in successive steps, and I think it's fair to say that it's been at around the 30 to 40% level, or in the 40s, for most of the post-war period. But of course, compliance with that nominal tax rate has changed at various points in time. And there's estimates that a considerable proportion of multinational profits have been shifted, an increasing proportion of multinational profits have been shifted throughout that period. And really it's that compliance with the nominal rate that is critical. And it's really in response to the fact that in Australia, but also in the US and other major OECD countries, as important as the nominal rate is, it's the fact that in many sectors of the economy, compliance with that nominal rate has been falling off over time. And so that's why it's critical that we put in place minimum tax rates, but that we also do that in conjunction with other OECD countries. So this is an important step forward. It's one of a number of bills this government has put in place, bills which ensure greater transparency, bills which are moving forward our multinational tax treatment and doing so in alignment with our major trading partners.
Thank you. The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Cook.
I commend the member for Fraser, who I hold in high esteem, and I agree with all of the contents of his speech. I think this is an area of bipartisanship. We need a global approach to tax, and we need multinationals taxed where their activity occurs. We need to stop profit shifting. It hurts Australia, it hurts developing countries, and companies that are just focused on minimising tax or avoiding tax, we do not want that behaviour in our country. Now, in the coalition, we welcome the continuation of the OECD two-pillar solution to multinational tax avoidance. This was started by the coalition very proudly and has been continued by the government. We also welcome the government following our lead in tax avoidance. The coalition took extensive action on this 9 years ago. As the host of the G20 in 2014, Australia played the leading role in the original base erosions profit shifting project. It was initiated in 2013 and delivered in 2015 under a coalition government. Under the coalition, Australia was an early and vigilant adopter of the OECD BEPS recommendations. These recommendations established the multilateral approach to prevent tax avoidance and increase tax transparency to tax administrators like our ATO. The coalition government's measures include introducing the diverted profits tax that limits the company's ability to shift profits outside of Australia. We introduced the multinational tax avoidance law, which ensured companies do not avoid a taxable presence in Australia. We strengthened the thin capitalisation rules, strengthening transfer pricing rules, doubling the penalties for tax avoidance, and we established the ATO Avoidance Task Force. This task force, which was created in 2016 under a coalition government, still enforces the existing laws and supports the current government's new tax avoidance measures, targeting these multinational enterprises, large public and private groups, and wealthy individuals. From July 2016 to November 2021, the ATO raised $24.2 billion in tax liabilities against large public groups and multinational corporations, privately owned and wealthy groups. This generated collections of $17.3 billion for the Australian taxpayer to be spent on the Australian taxpayer. $15.3 billion of the liabilities were raised against large public groups and multinationals. $15.3 billion of multinationals that was spent on Australians. $13.6 billion of the liabilities and $9.5 billion of the collections are attributable to this task force started by the Coalition. Our system of tax is undermined when people or their organisations avoid or attempt to avoid their tax obligations. In my electorate of Cook, where there are many small and medium businesses, the fact that these multinationals avoid tax, while these small and medium, hard-working, everyday Australian business owners who can't park profits in tax havens, it's a constant source of irritation and it's uncompetitive. It's not a level playing field. Already these small and little businesses are fighting these multinationals with one hand tied behind their back, and we don't need to give them a tax leg up on top of it. In my first speech, I talked about how small businesses hire in our economy while large businesses fire. Small and medium businesses employ up to 70% of Australians. Small and medium enterprises were responsible for all the net job growth in this economy. That means, as a whole, large businesses fire more people than they hire, while small and medium businesses hire more people than they fire. But unfortunately, under this Labor government, up to 16,000 businesses have now gone insolvent. Small business is doing it tough, and we need the government to do a better job listening. Yes, we're thankful for the targeting multinationals avoiding tax, but small and medium enterprises need more support than they are currently getting from this government. This legislation, while good, it highlights an important point. Labor have broken their tax promises. Now, Jim Chalmers said in the election, we've made it and I quote, "We have made it very clear. We don't have any proposals for tax increases beyond working with other countries to make multinational tax regime fairer." If only this were true. This promise to only increase tax on multinationals before the last election is broken. It's broken by Labor raising tax on superannuation. In time, this will capture 1 in 10 of every Australians and young Australians earning average wages today. This is according to Treasury's own modelling. Labor are now going to tax unrealised capital gains. This is a wealth tax, unprecedented in Australia and unprecedented around the world. It's an assault on family-owned businesses. It's an assault on people who own real estate or farms in their self-managed super, and it's assault on middle-class Australians. Labor are increasing taxes on franking credits, banking in $500 million in taxes from Australian companies, Australia retirees, Australian super funds and Australian charities. Again, this is a tax on middle Australia. Labor have ended the small business tax concessions, getting rid of the instant asset write-off relied on by Australia's small businesses. Yes, it's great we're taxing multinationals and we're stopping them or reducing the amount of tax they avoid, but we need more help for small businesses and more help for everyday Australians. These higher taxes will not help a cost of living crisis. These higher taxes will not solve our anemic economic growth. These higher taxes will not solve the fact we've been in a household recession for over a year. These higher taxes will not solve the collapsing productivity we've had under this Labor government. And these taxes will not solve the fact that the Treasurer is not running this economy, inflation is running our economy. We're in a recession, a household recession, and our economy is shuddering to a halt with what everyday Australians are experiencing. Everyday Australians are experiencing their personal income up by 20%. Everyday Australians are experiencing prices up by 10%. Everyday Australians are experiencing real wages collapsing by 8% as they get poorer year on year. Everyday Australians are experiencing living standards collapsing by 8%. They're experiencing their household savings down 10 percentage points. And a family with a typical mortgage of $750,000, and it's much higher for many in my electorate of Cook, are now $35,000 worse off under this Labor government. And our inflation is now much higher than most of the developed world. Australia is at the back of the pack compared to our peer nations. Higher spending, higher interest rates for longer, and higher taxes, with an extra $315 billion across 3 budgets, broken promises on taxes on super, taxes on franking credits, taxes on small businesses, and sneaky increasing income tax increases through bracket creep. These should be indexed to inflation. Changes to multinational tax arrangements in this bill do not make up for these taxes on aspirational everyday Australians. Changes to multi-tax arrangements in this bill do not make up for Labor's inaction on inflation. Changes to multinational tax arrangements do not make up for rate rises, 12 in a row, that have happened under Labor's watch. And changes to multinational tax arrangements do not make up for this economic warfare on everyday Australians. Australians deserve a government that's focused on the challenges they face today. Yes, we agree with the government on this legislation, but we do not apologise for holding the government to account for their broken promises on tax, for the cratering productivity numbers, and their failure to fight inflation. In my community of Cook, people are concerned. They're concerned about a government spending more. They're concerned about a government taxing more. They're concerned about government spending higher for longer. They're concerned about inflation higher for longer. And they're working out how they're going to make ends meet. Now, while the Treasurer spins that actually real wages are going up, we know that's not the case. Everyday Australians feel it and they're paying the price. Now, community groups are stepping in. In Cook, I caught up with St Vincent's de Paul, and they're helping people facing homelessness. They're helping people with food hampers who can't afford food. They're helping people pay their electricity bills. There are people in my electorate doing it tough, and I'm listening, and we are going to hold the government to account to make sure they listen. The spending that this government is doing is resulting in people facing higher housing insecurity because interest rates are higher for longer. This spending has resulted in members in my community looking to move interstate. I was just speaking with a school teacher just last week who's looking at moving his wife and their family to WA because they can't make ends meet and they can't afford a house in Cook, away from their parents, away from their grandparents, because we are ripping away the Australian dream of growing up with your family, paying off your house and spending your Christmases, your Easter and your school holidays with your family because they can't afford it. Labor's approach is to spend first and then ask questions about the inflationary impact. Now, expert after expert has called this out. Michelle Bullock commented, and I quote, "We've revised up our forecast for demand growth, and that's due to stronger public spending." Independent economist Chris Richardson said that the RBA's statement was, and I quote, "as clear as they can be." And he went on to say there's extra spending in the system. Savings of hard-working Australians in my electorate are being eroded by inflation. The household savings ratio in December was revised down from 3.2% to 1.6%. What does this do to the retirement prospects for members in my electorate? Well, it takes them away. It erodes their retirement savings. And we can see Australia is failing at controlling inflation by looking at our inflation compared to other countries. It's higher than Sweden, it's higher than the UK, it's higher than Norway, it's higher than Canada, it's higher than New Zealand, and it's higher than the USA. Why must be the question. Why? Well, it's uncontrolled government spending. While the private sector is cutting back, they're cutting back on spending, they're cutting back on investment, the government's got their foot to the floor on the accelerator with increased government spending. Australia is the only G10 nation with inflation going up. The question must be why. Now, what is this spending is related in? How has this spending helped Australian households? Well, it's $30,000 of increased spending for every Australian household. And when I speak to the community members of Cook, do they feel $30,000 better off per household? They don't. They actually feel poorer. They feel poorer than they did 3 years ago. So I would ask the Labor government, stop the uncontrolled spending and give back the money through tax cuts to everyday Australians. My constituents can't afford more of the same. They can't afford another $315 billion over another 3 years. They can't afford more interest rate rises fuelled by inflation. They can't afford a Labor Party's ideological energy policy that risks driving up energy even more than it's been driven up already. We know the former government consistently delivered lower taxes for families, lower taxes for small business, and implemented more than a dozen measures to combat multinational tax avoidance. And I do welcome this legislation. I do welcome the Labor government's multinational tax avoidance, building on what we did over 9 years. But the current government voted 8 times against delivering a bigger tax cut to small business in last year's instant asset write-off. Small businesses need more help. Yes, it's fine to punish large businesses, but we need to start helping small businesses more. The current government's last multinational tax bill was so badly designed, it taxed Australian companies. Yes, this legislation is better, but it's taken a while to get it right. Since that election, Australians are now paying 20% more in income tax because of sneaky bracket creep. And the government has banked over $60 billion from everyday Australians in bracket creep. It's about time bracket creep was indexed to inflation. Now, despite to promise to only raise taxes on multinationals, the government has broken promises, raising tax on superannuation, on unrealised capital gains, on franking credits, on personal income tax, and an end to the small business tax incentives. So yes, this is good legislation, but middle Australia, small business Australia, they need more. I know the small businesses in Cook expect more action. I know we must ensure that the small businesses, that they keep more of the money they make. So yes, let's tax multinationals, but let's give small business a leg up too.
Call the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Integrity is at the heart of everything that this Labor government seeks to achieve. An Assistant Minister for Competition, Charities and Treasury, Dr Andrew Lee, has been a champion for integrity throughout our tax system since he was appointed. And now we're taking on the next challenge, multinational companies that do not pay their fair share of tax. We are acting on a commitment that Labor took to the 2022 election. This included supporting the OECD G20 two-pillar solution, a multilateral solution representing the most significant reform to the international corporate tax system in a century. Reforming the international tax system is no easy feat, but we join with our global community to ensure that global firms are paying their fair share of tax and not exploiting unintentional loopholes across jurisdictions. Australia has long been a champion of the global 15% minimum tax. And we are now in the first group of nations to implement a global minimum tax and domestic minimum tax of 15%. From this year, this tax will apply to multinational enterprises with an annual global revenue of at least €750 million, which is approximately 1.2 billion Australian dollars or greater. The global minimum tax will ensure large multinational enterprises pay a minimum level of tax on income arising in each jurisdiction where they operate. This will support global momentum towards a fairer international tax system by putting a floor on tax competition and levelling the playing field between large multinational enterprises and Australian businesses. The global minimum tax is a crucial step in the ongoing efforts to ensure integrity and fairness across the system. The global minimum tax will reduce the tax rate differential between Australia and low-tax countries. It will help protect Australia's corporate tax base by reducing the incentive to shift profits abroad. It will make Australia a more attractive place to invest, and it will boost economic growth. Putting in place the global minimum corporate tax will allow us to apply a top-up tax on large multinational groups operating in Australia where their overseas income is taxed below 15%. And under the domestic minimum tax, it will give us additional taxing rights on the low-taxed Australian income of large multinational groups. Implementing a domestic minimum tax complements the global minimum tax and ensures that Australia collects revenue from locals under taxation. Australia's legislation will be peer-reviewed by the OECD to ensure it produces consistent outcomes with the global anti-base erosion rules and is recognised by other jurisdictions. By making multinationals pay a minimum effective tax rate of 15%, the OECD estimates annual global revenue gains of over $300 billion. In many cases, this revenue is being channelled away from the tax systems of developing nations, consolidating a global divide between sophisticated financial centres and resource-rich, less developed parts of the world. Australia joins the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, South Korea and the European Union and other jurisdictions in implementing the global minimum tax from 2024. Our government will help ensure large multinationals pay their fair share of tax. This is the most recent in a suite of multinational tax measures that have been delivered by the Albanese Labor government. Our government has already delivered 4 significant multinational tax reforms. First, our new subsidiary disclosure law will require public companies, listed and unlisted, to disclose information on the number of their subsidiaries in the country of tax residency. This will make the way that companies structure their subsidiaries, including for tax purposes, transparent to both the government and the public. Second, companies with tenders and government procurement processes valued above $200,000 are now required to disclose their country of tax residency as part of the Buy Australia plan under the Fair Go procurement framework. This requirement to disclose their country of tax residency complements broader changes implemented by our government in taking decisive action on tax advisor misconduct, including by increasing tax promoter penalties and increasing the powers of tax regulators. Third, in our first budget in October 2022, we boosted funding for the Australian Taxation Office's Tax Avoidance Task Force by $200 million a year. In this year's budget, we have further extended the operation of this task force to 2028, allowing the ATO to crack down on tax dodging by multinational enterprises, large public and private groups, and Australia's wealthiest individuals. Finally, we've also tightened Australia's thin capitalisation rules to stop a common approach taken by multinationals to minimise their tax. Our new approach reduces the ability of taxpayers to create artificial interest-bearing debt in Australia as a way of maximising interest-related deductions and in turn reduce their overall tax bill. Our government is also delivering 5 further multinational tax reforms. First, the government's bill to create a public country-by-country reporting register has been introduced to Parliament, and once it is passed, reporting requirements will apply from the 1st of July this year. Creating a public country-by-country reporting register will deliver a key part of the government's multinational tax integrity election commitment. It will see Australia put in place a world-leading set of disclosure laws. Second, the government is progressing its election commitment to implement a public register of beneficial ownership, which will show who ultimately owns, controls or receives profits from a company or legal vehicle operating in Australia. Third, we've also added to our election agenda by strengthening the way our foreign investment system reduces the risk of multinational investors avoiding tax. On the 1st of May this year, the Treasurer announced changes to deliver a stronger, more streamlined and more transparent approach to foreign investment. Foreign investment has a key role to play in our economy, but only when it's in the national interest. So we are making sure that foreign investors pay their fair share of tax in Australia. This includes releasing updated guidance about the kind of tax arrangements that will attract greater scrutiny, such as those that are overly complex. Fourth, to further protect our tax system from foreign investments where investors currently have incentives to circumvent intended outcomes in our tax settings, we're strengthening the foreign resident capital gains tax regime. As part of this year's budget, the government announced it will strengthen the regime in line with the OECD standards to ensure foreign residents pay their fair share of tax in Australia. And fifth, in this year's budget, we also announced a new royalty penalty. From 1 July 2026, the penalty will apply to significant global entities with annual revenue of over $1 billion, where they avoid Australian royalty withholding tax by understating the value of royalty payments or disguising them as some other kind of transaction. These 9 measures, 4 that we have already delivered, 5 that are in progress, demonstrate the government's strong commitment to multinational tax integrity. It's important to see this in its historical and international context. The last leap forward on transparency was introduced by the Gillard government in 2012. Then Assistant Treasurer David Bradbury put in place the legislation that has ensured public transparency of tax payable by large corporate entities. The landmark changes allowed for the publication of the tax liabilities of large corporate entities, including multinational corporations. And then we had almost a decade of inertia on transparency and an on-again, off-again approach to multinational tax integrity. The Coalition have the chance to show that in spite of their slow-motion charge towards a fairer global tax system, they can change pace and keep step with these plans. That they won't let passing time deliver further proxy bonuses to multinational tax cheats. Deputy Speaker, no government in Australian history has done more than the Albanese Labor government to address multinational tax dodging. No other country is doing more to improve multinational tax fairness. We've already made a significant move in increasing the transparency of tax arrangements for multinational enterprises, and we are taking it further. Our multinational tax integrity policies will address tax loopholes exploited by multinationals and improve global tax transparency. Our plan is good for taxpayers, good for competition, and good for Australia. By tightening our debt deduction laws and committing to be part of the global 15% minimum corporate tax rate, we are keeping faith with the OECD's best practice on global tax integrity. Over 131 nations have signed up to this OECD plan. We've promised that we'll involve industry in constructive consultations to ensure our policies didn't have an unwarranted impact on legitimate commercial arrangements, and that's what we've done. As you'd expect with these complex changes to tax laws, there has also been an extensive consultation with experts and civil society. Tax transparency is a critical part of the social contract multinationals have with the communities in which they operate. The government's focus is to encourage a behavioural change by multinationals and large corporates about how they view their tax obligations, including their decision-making around tax planning strategies. Enhanced public scrutiny on tax information will help provide the community with a better understanding of how much tax multinationals pay relative to their activities. Just as the Gillard government passed laws requiring the tax office to annually report the tax payable by our largest firms, the Albanese government is moving to improve tax transparency. Public companies, listed and unlisted, will now be required to disclose information on the number of their subsidiaries and their country of tax domicile. This means public companies will be required to be upfront with the public about how they're structured, including for tax purposes. This will increase transparency on their corporate structures and whether they are operating with opaque tax arrangements. Creating a public country-by-country reporting register will deliver a key part of the government's multinational tax integrity election commitment. It will see Australia put in place a world-leading set of disclosure laws. Our government is progressing its election commitment to implement a public register of beneficial ownership, which will show who ultimately owns, controls, or receives profits from a company or legal vehicle operating in Australia. Multinational tax reform has several benefits for our economy. Economists Thomas Torslov, Ludwig Veer and Gabriel Zuckman estimate that close to 40% of multinational profits, around US $600 billion, are shifted to low-tax countries each year. This global profit-shifting industry causes significant damage to the revenue base of countries such as Australia. Weir and Zuckman calculate that in 2019, around 10% of the corporate tax income was lost as a result of global profit sharing. They estimate that back in 1975, this figure was less than 0.1%. A race to the bottom between nation states has seen average corporate tax rates fall from 49% in 1985 to 24% in 2019. Australia relies more heavily on company tax relative to other OECD countries, even though Australia's aggregate tax burden across all levels of government is lower than the OECD average. Since company taxes comprise 19% of Australia's revenue base, to accept the accounting tricks and dodgy behaviour that multinational firms have a massive impact on Australia.
The division has been called for in the House. The proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division. The proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division. The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I'll call the member for Menzies.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, 70% of my electorate are first or second generation migrants, and I wasn't born here, and in fact I was born in the Republic of Ireland. And like many migrants, my heart and my complete loyalties are here to Australia, but you still have a bit of your heart that longs for home. And one of the things I note about my original birthplace is its corporate tax rate of 12.5%. And well, yeah, I know. Well, and to be clear, I arrived in Australia when I was 10, and it's fair to say I did well at school, but not so well that I knew that the corporate tax rate was that. And I'm pretty sure, Deputy Speaker, the corporate tax rate wasn't that when I came out. It was done later, and for a particular reason. For a particular reason that has direct impacts on our country and what we do. And why does that matter? It matters not just now, but into the coming decades and the sort of country that we pass on to future generations. We receive many documents and reports, but there's one that should stand out amongst all others, and it's the intergenerational report. And in the intergenerational report, it has some very sobering numbers and graphs. And on page 177 from memory, Deputy Speaker, there is a graph that really jumps out. It is the graph on projected government spending at a Commonwealth level through to 2063. So the report looks 40 years into the future. And that graph is adjusted for inflation. So it's on 2022, 2023 dollars. And what it tells you is this. There was a spike in Commonwealth government spending during COVID. We all know that happened. But when you revert back to the Commonwealth spending per person in Australia, it's at about $24,000 per person, not per taxpayer, per person. And without any improvements in productivity, on 2022-23 dollars, that will be at $40,000 per person. Now, the without productivity improvements is important because if we don't have improvements on productivity, then our average and median wages will be the same or worse. And what are they, Deputy Speaker? They are $95,000 for the average wage and $65,000 for the median wage. How does that work for future generations if one level of government, not accounting for the state and local expenditure, plus all the other costs, are going to take $40,000 per person when the average wage is $95,000 and the median wage $65,000? It is unworkable. Unworkable. So there are two main streams that we as a nation and legislators have to turn our mind to. One is the spending side and the other is the tax side. So briefly on the spending side, that's not the subject of this bill, but that matters too. And what the intergenerational report says is that there's 5 line items that will have the bulk of growth. 3 of them are in the care economy, and a part of that is a product of an ageing population. And the other is defence and interest on debt. So those 5 line items are growing more than any other. And there is work for us to do, and we should do that in a constructive and bipartisan way where we can, particularly when it comes to the care economy, because we can all agree that they are essential items of government expenditure, but they can be done more efficiently. And where we can do that without politicising it, we should do it because it's in the national interest. But the other side of the intergenerational report that matters is the tax side. And there is a disparity in how we tax in this country, particularly on the corporate level. And there's a disparity of power. And if you are a small or a medium or even larger domestic company that doesn't have a presence globally, doesn't have the resources of huge law firms and big four accounting firms to help you produce a company structure that is so complex it looks like a drawing from Mr. Squiggle. And full disclosure, Deputy Speaker, I helped write some of those when I was a junior mergers and acquisitions lawyer. And surprise, surprise, and I'm not breaching any client confidentiality, the company at the top wasn't here. Wasn't here. It was somewhere else. Ends up somewhere else, often an exotic location, the Cayman Islands or somewhere else like that, and, or my homeland of Ireland, if you were to look at a company like Meta. And what is the consequences of that? The consequences of that is that we are treating companies who have a disproportionate level of power differently. And the consequence is that lost tax revenue, because the tax isn't being collected here, it's being collected at a reduced rate offshore, by a sleight of hand, a trick, means that we then have to turn to Australian taxpayers and Australian companies to raise more. And for those through bracket creep who are pushing more towards the top rates, when you add other taxes, particularly on goods and services, we're paying more than half of our income as Australians on tax, more than half. And that is unfair when companies are extracting those profits from here but paying 12.5% in Ireland or even lower in other countries. So the intent behind this bill is one that has bipartisan support and one that we support. And wherever we can, whether it's through power or prosperity, we should acknowledge the human instinct and inevitability to see power and prosperity concentrated. And the antidote to that is that we should turn our minds to principles and policies that see the democratisation of power and the democratisation of prosperity. Not the socialist dividing up and allocating it, but the democratisation of it, which means that through your own endeavours, your own choices, we make it a fair game, that those who work hard and compete hard will be rewarded. And again, we live in a global world, but if you were to use the metaphor that many international relations scholars use of a billiards table, each of us as nation states are spheres on that table. And we are sovereign and we have rules that are enforced. But there is, Deputy Speaker, a state of anarchy in between those billiard balls. And the incentive for larger multinational corporations to shift around the billiards table to those that have the lowest tax rate is one that we are entitled as a sovereign nation to address. We're entitled as a sovereign nation to address. But Deputy Speaker, it's important that when we do that, and we have supported this, that we acknowledge at the same time that's not the only solution to reducing the burden that we put on domestic companies and domestic individuals. This government has broken its promises on domestic reform, on domestic tax reform in particular. So the promise was made before the election, and promises matter, they should matter, that there would only be increased taxes on multinationals before the last election. And that's what we're doing here, and we agree with that. But let's turn to the record of the government on what they actually did. What they actually did was raise taxes on superannuation. They are taxing unrealised capital gains and increasing taxes on franking credits, and have ended the small business tax concessions. Now, on any measure, Deputy Speaker, that is a broken promise. A broken promise. And the social media tile that says only taxing multimillionaires is a nonsense. Is a nonsense because it's not indexed. It's not indexed. So through bracket creep, all Australians are being pushed forward into these higher tax rates. And we know that those higher taxes, those higher domestic taxes, are going to do nothing to help with the cost of living crisis. They are going to do nothing to lift the productivity growth that is required for us to fund the care economy and still do all of the other things that make our nation great and prosperous. They're not going to do anything to solve the delicate balance that we are leaving all of the work of the RBA to do, which is to bring inflation down and not collapse the economy. That's the high wire act that the RBA are trying to walk. But it's very hard to do that when the government's pulling you in one other direction. You have to lean on the other, like a seesaw that's out of balance. So this is an important bill. It has our support, but it should not be given by the coalition in a way that doesn't acknowledge the broken promises that have been made and the serious work that has to be done on out-of-control spending by this government, which is impacting our task of bringing inflation down now and doing nothing to make that horror story that we see in the intergenerational report of 40 years from now be fixed. And we must all, as a matter of urgency, turn our mind to that. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Hasluck.
When multinational corporations pay less or no tax, ordinary Australian workers end up paying more. I rise to speak on the Taxation, Multinational, Global and Domestic Minimum Tax Bill 2024 and the associated bills. I do so knowing that there will be legislators in many countries speaking to congruent legislation at this time. These bills address tax challenges that have existed for many decades and which are exacerbated by the continuing digitisation and globalisation of the economy. The global minimum tax will allow a top-up tax to be imposed on a resident multinational parent or subsidiary company where the group's revenue is taxed below 15% overseas. The domestic minimum tax likewise will apply on any low-taxed domestic income. The purpose of these bills is to reduce the incentive that has for many years encouraged multinational companies to shift profits and revenues between jurisdictions by various artifices in order to exploit differences in taxation regimes and by doing so minimising the tax that they pay. In his second reading speech, the Assistant Minister noted that we would be joining hands with countries like Canada, the EU, the UK and Japan, among 60 states that have already taken legislative action to address tax evasion. In June 2021, the G7 stated their support for this initiative, and shortly thereafter, in July 2021, 130 countries at the OECD in Paris endorsed a global minimum tax rate of 15%. In 2021, US President Biden stated that the agreement was an important step in moving the global economy forward. There is some tension today in the US between some not wanting to miss out on the changes and some who don't want the US to be an early adopter. The current administration's attitude is to do whatever it takes to get it done. We will need to wait and see how long it takes the US to join the party, but the momentum is there. Brazil is on board, Vietnam is introducing it, Kenya is considering the change. We have a tax system in place in Australia, a progressive system whereby we require those who have the greater income to contribute more to the social good. The fact that for many years very large companies have made significant revenues in Australia and have yet paid nowhere near the tax that they should have is frankly just a disgrace. The problem now accelerates as the economy digitises. The bill, in concert with the actions being taken by countries around the world, will reduce the incentive to shift operations to low-tax jurisdictions. The reduction of these tax advantages currently exploited by very large companies will, in turn, create a more level playing field and encourage and support the small and medium-sized businesses, many of them Australian, that currently find it difficult to compete. As Minister Lee stated, suburban firms shouldn't have to compete with tax-dodging multinationals, and I quite agree. And for years, and right now today, be it in the Hay Street Mall in Perth or in Midland Gate or at the Ellenbrook Shopping Centre in my seat of Hasluck, that unfair competition is going on as I speak. Likewise, it will make Australia a more attractive place for international investment. This legislation will thus be good for competition, and not just here but around the world. It will take effect immediately, capturing income from the start of this year and with the first returns due in mid-2026. Companies have been on notice since 2021, and before that this was coming. It will capture companies with a combined global revenue of €750 million, which is today just over 1.24 billion Australian dollars. So some of the companies that will be captured include Amazon, Exxon, Apple, Shell, Volkswagen, Alphabet or Google, Toyota, Glencore and BP. It is salient to consider that many of these companies have annual incomes that eclipse many of the GDPs of independent nations. Walmart, the largest, perhaps has an annual revenue larger than the GDPs of Thailand, Austria or Norway. And let's unpack the example that Minister Lee gave of Google's $19 billion of revenue in Bermuda in 2016. Leaving aside the fact that $19 billion of economic activity on an island of less than 54 square kilometres would undoubtedly destroy said island, we should never allow legal fictions to stand because they always cause poor outcomes. Australians account for perhaps up to 1% of the internet users of the world. On that basis, 1% of that $19 billion of revenue was in reality created in Australia. $190 million that we just didn't see, or tax. If there was an Australian company trying to be competitive in search at that time or since, how could they compete with Google? Getting this law in place here and internationally now at this time is crucial. Our economies are not going to be less digitised in the years to come, and without ensuring a level playing field, competition and initiative will be quashed. The revenue base will be eroded, the economic equality and fairness will be further reduced. Some estimates put the annual loss of tax revenue due to the ongoing global shell game at 10%. We need to bring this home to what this means for our local communities. When some of the very largest companies are making money in Australia but are not paying their way, it has a real effect on what should be the revenue collected by government each year, and so has a real effect on the services that government are able to provide. An evasion of taxation means less money for education in a Hasluck. It means that public schools will not have the facilities that they should have. Evasion of taxation means less money for health in Hasluck. It means that our local cancer treatment centre might not be able to meet the demand that presents to it, and that local residents already facing hardship have to travel further and wait longer for treatment, making them sicker. And evasion of taxation means that competition is reduced everywhere and in Hasluck, which means that a new venture that might have meant local jobs can't get a start because it just can't compete. The local cafe can't afford to stay open in the afternoon, fewer tourists stop in the valley. In short, the economy is better and life is better when we don't have major global corporations freeloading on us. Small, medium and large companies in Australia who do the right thing and pay their tax feel rightly annoyed when they see the large, very wealthy global companies getting away with what amounts to a deception played against Australian people. In countries that are not as wealthy as ours, this practice of avoidance means a smaller pool of national income for projects designed to assist development across health, education and other development goals. Our participation in this global effort in partnership with other nations will reap benefits far beyond our shores. And Australians, we don't like freeloaders. This government is taking action to ensure that anyone who wishes to hide from the tax obligations that we all share will find that hiding more and more difficult and uneconomical as time goes on. And we shouldn't have to wait for a leak of documents like the Panama Papers in 2016 or the Luxembourg leaks in 2014 before wealthy companies and individuals are made to meet their just tax obligations in the countries that they actually live, operate and earn income in. After the Panama Papers leak, the ATO launched investigations that found over $140 million of unpaid tax liabilities. The Panama Papers included historical references to BHP Billiton, Westfield, Alcan Corporation, ANZ Bank and the National Australia Bank. Many of the tax havens used by wealthy corporations and individuals are small islands like Bermuda or Cayman. The fact that these are Commonwealth territories is embarrassing. The EU is fully behind the changes, yet Luxembourg, a founding member of the EU, has been a low-tax environment for many years and utilised by many companies within Europe for that reason. Money talks. The major reason change has been so slow to come in this field is that there are many economically powerful corporations and wealthy individuals who have concomitant political clout and are well motivated to sustain the status quo for as long as possible. Apparently the Cayman Islands are lovely. There's scuba diving on shipwrecks and crystal clear waters. Above sea level, things are not so crystal clear though, with more companies registered there, 100,000, than there are residents. I trust that there are currently no Australian politicians who have invested interest in the Cayman Islands or like havens. The member for Hume, in his speech on the bill, did manage for about 3 vainglorious minutes to speak in favour of it, and so I expect that the bill will have support across the House. He then spent the remainder of his time speaking on irrelevant matters related to his own political interests. It seems to me that on a matter of such importance, we should try to confine our remarks and our amendments to the clauses and scope of their legislation, and I hope other members opposite will do better. The member for Hume has likewise given notice of an amendment. This is serious legislation, yet the amendment proposed by the member for Hume is an incoherent ramble that does not, in fact, address any part of these bills. I can only hope that no unlucky legislator in another country, casting about to see what others are saying about this landmark global legislative change, accidentally comes across the member for Hume's amendment and tries to understand how on earth it has any relevance to the bill. The member for Hume should be careful not to waste the time of innocent legislators and their staff overseas, and he certainly shouldn't be wasting the time of this Parliament either. I will be voting against the feckless amendment by the member for Hume. The former Coalition Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, appeared to support these global rules. It is unclear how much support he received from the former Prime Minister Morrison. In any event, the adoption of this legislation has been Labor policy since 2022 and before, and the coalition simply didn't get it done. And in so many other areas of policies, such as the NAC and environmental law, they now have a chance to support legislation that they have every chance to enact but drag their feet on or ignored. The coalition years are a litany of lost opportunity. Transparency and the availability of good data is essential to planning and to good policy, and this is true in any area or field. Tax transparency is part of the social contract that businesses have with the communities in which they operate and make money. This is true whether the business is a sole practitioner working from home in Midland, a distillery in the Swan Valley that employs 20 people, or Google with an annual revenue of $305 billion US. At the end of the day, delivering value to shareholders can never be at the expense of the communities within which that value is created. This is good legislation, and it evidences Australia's commitment to be better, fairer and more equal economic global order. Ernst & Young described the introduction of this regime as a significant shift in global taxation. Australia has been a firm champion of the global 15% minimum tax rate on multinationals. By enacting this legislation now, we will be among a strong group of first movers, the actions of which will bring other nations more quickly to agreement and cooperation. I support the bill and look forward to seeing the intent of this legislation supported across this Parliament and across the world.
Thank you. The two, and I call the member for Melbourne.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Greens will support this bill through the House, but we reserve our position in the Senate. Since the pandemic, big corporations in Australia have been making eye-watering profits. In 2022, corporate profits reached their highest level ever, and they haven't stopped there. Now, at the moment, over 30% of the entire economy goes to the profits of big corporations. Australia's 500 biggest companies made $98 billion in so-called crisis profits post the pandemic. Corporations like Woolworths, Hancock Prospecting, National Australia Bank, AGL Energy and Harvey Norman reaped billions of dollars in profits off the back of forcing people to pay higher prices. These corporate profits are driving the cost of living crisis. They are making more because you are paying more. Wages are not keeping up. According to the OECD latest data, real wages are now at 4.8% below pre-pandemic levels. The share of profits which goes to working people through wages is now at record lows. We've lost nearly 14 years of progress on wage growth, and according to the RBA, it's going to take another 15 years for us to make up the lost ground. This is an economy that has been rigged by Labor and the Liberals in the interest of big corporations. The RBA Governor, Michelle Bullock, admitted at the beginning of the year what we all knew, that big corporations were using the cost of living crisis as cover to push up prices. Alan Fells held an inquiry into price gouging and found that people are paying too much, too often, for the basics that they need in life. He cited submissions like those from Danielle, a nurse whose bills rose over $8,700 over 2023, while her wages only increased $102. What makes it worse, though, is that people like Danielle pay more tax than many multinational corporations. In fact, 1 in 3 big corporations in this country pays no tax at all. And when it comes to the coal and gas sector, the number is more like 2 in 3 big corporations paying no tax at all. There are 91 coal and gas corporations and corporate entities operating in Australia. But going through the tax database, we found that 54 of those 91 corporations paid no tax, not a cent. So just to spell it out, for every coal and gas corporation operating in this country, 3 out of 5 of them paid no tax. And those 54 corporations boasted $100 billion in income last year. $100 billion in income and not a cent in tax. What an absolute scam. A truly rigged economy. 70% of gas corporations in Australia don't pay any tax. 33 gas corporations earned over $68 billion in revenue and didn't pay any tax. Petronas Australia, $1.14 billion in total income, no tax paid. Total Energies, $2.6 billion in revenue, no tax paid. Chevron Australia Downstream Holdings, $5 billion in total income, no tax paid. ExxonMobil, $15.5 billion in total income, no tax paid. They have never once paid tax, ExxonMobil Australia, in the 8 years of corporate tax reports. Coal companies aren't much better. Half of them avoided paying any tax, and the half who didn't made a tidy $28 billion in total income. And to top it all off, some of these coal and gas corporations are getting handouts from the government, subsidised by you, the taxpayer. That's billions that we could use to build more housing, for mental health care, for disability support, for students struggling with completely unaffordable degrees. We're all victims of a grand extortion, a swindle, a fraud, and Labor and the Coalition are all in on it. In the 2023 financial year, the major parties received $2 million in donations from fossil fuel corporations. Companies like Adani, Woodside, Santos and Chevron, and they're just the ones that we know about due to our broken donation system. And what do we get in return? We get a nurse that pays more tax than a multinational, and a Labor government that's spending 14 times more on giving money to corporations to turbocharge the climate and cost of living crisis than it will to the National Disaster Relief Fund. It's a joke, and people are sick of it. There's not a gas shortage in Australia, there's an integrity shortage. There's a shortage of politicians who actually represent their constituents, not the interests of the coal and gas corporations paying them off. One nurse shouldn't pay more tax than 33 gas corporations. One teacher shouldn't pay more tax than 21 coal corporations. Together, in the 10 years between 2014 and 2024, all the teachers in this country paid twice as much tax as the entire oil and gas sector. We pay more in HECS and student-related loans. There's more in HECS and student-related loans going to the government of the country than there is revenue in the PRRT, the big gas tax, which is designed to raise revenue from the oil and gas industry. It's no wonder that the Australian Taxation Office described the gas industry as a systemic non-payer of tax. And the Labor government has failed to mention the role of big corporate profits in driving up the cost of living. Failed to mention it. How can you tackle a crisis when you can't even say who's causing it? When you can't even identify those big corporations that are price gouging? And rather than cracking down on the big supermarkets, the Prime Minister is more likely to dress up in a Coles high-vis top and pose for photos with them. And rather than making big corporations pay their fair share, the Prime Minister is more likely to have dressed up in a Rio Tinto shirt. That's because the Prime Minister is more concerned with managing the economy for the profits of big corporations and billionaires than he is with the concerns of everyday people. While people are struggling to keep a roof over their head, being smashed at the supermarket and paying too much on their power bills, Labor is backing the big corporations. In the past year, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, CEOs are giving themselves double-digit pay rises while many of the same corporations call for restraint when it comes to the pay of their workers. We now, in this wealthy country of ours, we now have over 3.3 million people living in poverty. The number of people who can't find an affordable place to live is growing, as is the number of people who are homeless. People are skipping meals so their kids don't miss out. This country's economy is rigged. Labor and Liberal both take huge donations from big corporations. Labor and Liberal have both refused to make the big corporations pay their fair share. And Labor and Liberals have both refused to do anything about price gouging from the big corporations. People are fed up with the Coles and Woolies of politics ripping them off at every turn. This is why more people every day are telling us that it is getting harder and harder to tell Labor and the Liberals apart. It doesn't have to be this way. We can make the big corporations pay their fair share of tax. We can make groceries cheaper by making price gouging illegal. We can freeze rent increases and drive down the cost of housing to the point where people can afford it. If we make the big corporations pay their fair share of tax, we can actually get to the heart of what's driving the cost of living crisis and start to invest in people.
The member for Melbourne will resume his seat. A division has been called for in the House. The proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division. The proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division or subsequent divisions. So the question before the Federation Chamber is that the amendment be agreed to. I think the member for Melbourne is finished, so I'll give the call to the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The Albanese Labor government is committed to ensuring big multinational corporations that make a profit in Australia pay tax in Australia. This one was an election commitment, and I'm happy to speak in support of this necessary reform, the Taxation, Multinational, Global and Domestic Minimum Tax Bill. It builds on the substantial reforms already implemented by Labor regarding the taxation of large multinational corporations. Our foundational belief is that tax transparency is a vital part of the social contract that multinationals have with the communities in which they operate and profit. This means insight into decision-making around tax strategies and management of tax obligations. This means shining a light into the dark places of the tax dealings of large multinationals. And this means giving the Australian public more information and understanding about how much tax these companies pay in comparison to their profits. Labor is committed to achieving this transparency through a raft of reforms. We've moved to require both listed and unlisted companies disclose information on their subsidiaries and their country of tax domicile. Again, this will provide a new and welcome level of transparency on how multinationals are structuring their businesses for tax purposes. It will also indicate whether they are operating with opaque tax arrangements. This information will be required in annual financial reports commencing on or after the 1st of July 2023. Further transparency is guaranteed with the Buy Australian plan under the Fair Go procurement framework. Companies tendering in government procurement processes worth over $200,000 will have to list the jurisdictions where they pay tax. In other words, to win a government contract, these companies need to make it clear that they're paying their fair share of tax. They must be good global citizens. In the October 2023 budget, we directed $200 million a year for 4 years to boost the ATO's tax avoidance task force, cracking down on tax dodging by multinational corporations as well as domestic entities. And the thin capitalisation rules have curbed the practice of abuse of debt deduction rules. If left unchecked, this can eat away at our tax base and mean Australian individuals and small businesses pay more. The former government did not see this as a problem during their wasted decade in office, but Labor does now. One of our election promises was to implement an interest limitation measure. The Labor government has toughened the rules around debt deductions to ensure tax fairness, limiting the ability for taxpayers to create artificial interest-bearing debt in Australia in order to maximise interest-related deductions that reduce their tax bill. This bill focuses on the reality that the taxation of multinational corporations and the lack of transparency around it has long been recognised as a global problem. The international corporate tax system is in dire need of reform, a fact recognised by the OECD and G20 nations. Many of the international conventions for corporate income taxation are now outdated. They do not account for digitalisation and globalisation. As the Treasurer said, by using digital technologies, large multinationals increasingly have the ability to operate at scale without mass in countries where they earn significant revenues without needing a traditional physical presence. These countries are then constrained from collecting corporate tax because traditionally such tax is collected in the country where the employees and assets are based. Additionally, multinationals have been able to move profits around from higher taxing countries to low or even no tax jurisdictions. This new business environment has led to threats to the stability of the international tax system. Some countries have introduced a digital service tax, prompting the United States to threaten retaliatory trade action, and other countries have decreased their corporate income tax rates to ensure that multinational companies keep investing in them. This negatively affects other countries and their ability to tax multinational and also affects domestic businesses. To deal with this, in 2021, 136 nations, so 90% of global GDP, agreed on what is called the two-pillar solution. This focuses on the allocation of taxing rights to market jurisdictions and the imposition of the global minimum tax rate of 15%, and was subsequently endorsed by G20 leaders. Pillar 1 focuses on the scale without mass problem and seeks to avoid a situation with escalating trade tariffs due to digital services taxes. Pillar 2 is the subject of this bill, a global minimum tax on large multinational corporations. It's not easy to reform the international taxation system, but it's critical that Australia does so. And we're doing so with this bill. Labor is taking a leadership role in instigating this multilateral change to ensure that big corporations pay their fair share. This reform means that these companies will have to pay a minimum level of tax in every jurisdiction where they operate. A big pat on the back for Australia for having the lead on this, Deputy Speaker. The global minimum tax and domestic minimum tax of 15% will apply to multinational corporations with an annual global revenue of approximately 1.2 billion Australian dollars. There are substantial benefits to these reforms. Firstly, the tax rate differential between Australia and low-tax countries will be reduced. This will decrease the incentive for corporations to shift profits overseas. Ultimately, it will make Australia an investment target and boost our economic growth. Australian businesses will benefit as well because the reforms will level the playing field when it comes to dealing or competing with large multinational corporations. They will adhere to the global anti-base erosion rules that were agreed by the OECD Inclusive Framework. This framework encompasses 145 jurisdictions. Deputy Speaker, a minimum corporate tax rate enables Australia to apply a top-up tax on large multinationals operating in Australia where their income is taxed overseas at a lower rate. And the domestic minimum tax rate enables additional taxing right on the low-tax Australian income of these companies. The domestic minimum tax is vital to ensure that Australia collects the revenue from these countries rather than other jurisdictions. There are over 50 jurisdictions in the process of implementing the two-pillar solution, so it's crucial that the domestic minimum tax protects Australian interests. In keeping with the global nature of these reforms, this legislation will be reviewed by the OECD to ensure that it is working as intended and to indicate to other jurisdictions that it is recognised. Other jurisdictions working to implement these reforms are the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, South Korea and the European Union. These countries all recognise that it is time to address the global divide between sophisticated financial centres and less developed but resource-rich countries. There is more to come with this government when it comes to holding multinational corporations accountable. We've introduced a bill to implement a public country-by-country reporting register, a world-leading set of disclosure requirements. We have set the application date of country-by-country reporting to the 1st of July this year to align it with the European Union implementation of a similar register. Importantly, it strengthens the global momentum towards transparency and fairer tax arrangements. This is complemented by a progress towards our election commitment to develop a public register of beneficial ownership. This will provide information on who owns, who controls, who receives profits from a company operating in Australia. This register will assist regulators and law enforcement agencies with their work on tax evasion, money laundering and complex financial crime. Complicated work, arduous work, Deputy Speaker, but one that will result in fairness for Australia. This bill, that is receiving broad support, is not the end of the Albanese Labor government's action to make multinational corporations accountable. In May, the Treasurer announced moves to ensure a stronger, more streamlined and more transparent approach to foreign investment. Another aspect is strengthening the foreign resident capital gains tax regime to make sure foreign residents pay their fair share of tax too. The May budget also announced a new royalty penalty. This will mean that companies with an annual revenue of $1 billion will attract a penalty if they avoid Australian royalty withholding tax. Deputy Speaker, all these measures will have a positive effect on the bottom line, and they will increase public confidence that the large multinational corporations that operate in Australia are paying what they should be, their fair share. I'm a bit disappointed that the Leader of the Greens spent his entire speech after saying he will support the legislation talking about the Labor Party and the Liberal Party. He didn't actually go in, do the hard work of going into the legislation and seeing what it would do. He just had a litany of whinging rather than looking at this hard, complicated international legislation and how it had impacts on Australian businesses and multinational businesses. Very disappointing that Jeremiah of whinging from the Greens continues, mainly targeted on Labor people and Labor seats. So, I obviously call on the opposition to support these reforms and be in step with the global push towards fairer corporate taxation regulations. Much of the work was actually started under the former government, I will acknowledge that, and I commend this bill to the House.
And I thank the member for Moreton for his contribution. The question before the Federation Chamber is that the amendment be agreed to, and I give the call to the member for Mayo.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I supported the Treasury Laws Amendment making multinationals pay their Fair Share Integrity and Transparency Bill in 2023, as I believe in the principles of fairness. This is a belief that is shared and resonates across Australia. Working Australians see that their hard-earned dollars whittled away by taxes, while multinational companies earning millions, and in some cases billions, pay little or no tax. and they have every right to be frustrated and angry. The making multinationals pay their fair share was just one positive step in a process of urgently required taxation reform. This bill supports a coordinated global effort to set a 15% global minimum tax and domestic minimum tax for all multinational enterprise groups with an annual revenue of at least $1.2 billion. While the changes are only expected to increase domestic taxation revenue by $210 million over the forward estimates, it is the indirect impact that is of greater importance. Assuming cost shifting and other tax mitigation measures secured in this place are effective, multinational entities must now carefully consider other factors such as sovereign risk, industrial relations, environmental laws, intellectual property risks and security against local taxation conditions. A multinational may accept a high degree of risk in undertaking a business in one country if the tax is sufficiently low. However, this equation quickly changes when the tax rates are equalised. Under the proposed arrangements supporting internationally by 135 countries, a minimum 15% tax is applied. When the threshold is not met, it triggers either a top-up tax in the originating jurisdiction or top-up application in the headquartered country, depending on the effective tax rate. The effect of this is twofold. A multinational entity may decide that higher business risk in a particular country is no longer worth it without the benefit of the lower tax rate. Consequently, countries such as Australia, with a higher corporate tax rate but lower sovereign risk, become more attractive. Companies domiciled in Australia also benefit from multinationals that choose to remain in lower tax countries. They'll see their taxes increase, and this tax gap reduction between Australia and other countries bridges some of the cost disadvantages of operating in Australia, equalising or at least bringing business costs closer, irrespective of where the business is domiciled, can't come at a more important time. Across Australia, corporate insolvencies are surging as inflation, cost of living and energy prices are taking effect. In the last 12 months, insolvencies exceeded over 10,000 for the first time since 2013. The trend is alarming. For the first 9 months of the financial year, insolvencies rose by 36.2% on the previous corresponding period. Monthly filings reached 1,137 insolvencies in March 2024, a record until May, when 1,249 new cases were initiated. While most of these companies are local and the benefit of a globally fair tax system will result in more companies investing or relocating their operations to Australia, with flow-on effects to the local economy. It is also reasonable to conclude that some of the $976 billion, nearly $1 trillion, in outbound foreign direct investment emanating from Australia businesses in 2022 would be redirected into Australia, creating local jobs and local opportunities. Deputy Speaker, this bill provides improved fairness across the global economy, and it is an appropriate reform and one that I certainly support. I thank the House.
And I thank the member for Mayo. It being virtually 6:30 p.m, the debate is interrupted in accordance with Standing Order 192B. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for the next sitting. I call the clerk.
Government Business Order of the Day number 3. Resumption of the debate on the question that grievances be noted.
And I thank the clerk. The question before the Federation Chamber now is that grievances be noted, and I give the call to the member for Indi.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. When I'm visiting the small and big towns of Indi, the farms, the businesses, the footy clubs, people tell me the Parliament and government must be stronger on integrity. Integrity in government and Parliament is absolutely core to public confidence in our democracy. Integrity might sometimes feel like a vibe, something a government or a member of Parliament either has or doesn't have. But there are clear markers against which I think we can grade the current Albanese government. Clear criteria we can check and say, you're on the right path, or you have a lot of work to do. So would you give this government a pass or a fail on integrity? Yes, this government was the government to finally establish a National Anti-Corruption Commission, without a doubt a significant achievement towards restoring public trust in government and in Parliament. But the NAC is only one pillar on which to build integrity in government. What of whistleblower protections, ending jobs for mates, getting big money and corporate influence out of politics, truth in political advertising, ending pork barrelling, and accountability for bad behaviour by elected representatives? In some of these areas, we have made no progress, and in others, we're lost in delays of good intentions. This government has a long way to go before they'll be known as the government of integrity. They can only ride on the coattails of the NAC for so long. Let me outline, Deputy Speaker, issue by issue, how this government have failed to achieve key integrity reforms and has let Australians down by not keeping their election promises on integrity. First up, whistleblower protections. In 2019, the then opposition leader, Mr Albanese, said, and I quote, "Journalism is not a crime. It's essential to preserving our democracy. We don't need a culture of secrecy. We need a culture of disclosure. Protect whistleblowers, expand their protections and the public interest test." End of quote. So, where are we in 2024 with Mr Albanese now Prime Minister? Well, we have some amendments to the Public Interest Disclosure Act so that the National Anti-Corruption Commission could commence. But experts have called these changes minor and technical. There have been some big wins: the government's successful advocacy for Julian Assange and the dropping of the case against Bernard Collaery. Significant. But at the same time, known whistleblowers, including war crimes whistleblower David McBride and tax whistleblower Richard Boyle, are either in prison or facing jail time because our whistleblower laws are completely inadequate. Instead, Deputy Speaker, we have a consultation paper on the reforms needed to protect such whistleblowers hidden in a departmental drawer for over 8 months now. We have absolutely no changes in the Public Interest Disclosure Act that are even remotely in line with the Prime Minister's past words. Promoting a culture of disclosure indeed. If this inaction by the Labor government continues, cultures of secrecy will continue, people will continue to stay silent, and injustices will inevitably flow. The second integrity subject I want to prosecute is electoral reform. This government talked a big game on electoral reform when in opposition, but we are staring down the barrel of the next election and we know we will not have better transparency around donations, fundraising and spending before we head to the polls. A 2023 Australia Institute poll found that 9 in 10 Australians want truth in political advertising laws in place before the next federal election. And on this same poll, 7 in 10 Australians agreed they were concerned about lies and misinformation that circulated on social media during the referendum campaign. But even after a referendum full of misleading and deceptive information, it is now obvious we will not have protections against misinformation and lies in political advertising or against the dangers of artificial intelligence in our next election campaign. The third integrity issue I want to grade the government on is ending pork barrelling. After 9 years of coalition government, we had more than enough evidence of government pork barrelling. The Australian National Audit Office found that former government ministers made funding decisions across multiple grant programs where, and I quote, there were indications of shortcomings in the assessment of the merit criterion and where the program was ineffective and fell short of ethical requirements, end of quote. Now, these grant programs are known as sports rorts, car park rorts, hospital rorts, great big barrels of pork, Deputy Speaker. Members of this government like to frequently cite the Coalition's track record in pork barrelling. They like to set themselves apart. And when I've raised this issue in this place previously, the Minister for Financial Services has stated the government is committed to increasing transparency and accountability for government decision-makings. And I acknowledge that last month the government strengthened the Commonwealth Grants Framework. I note that this includes quarterly reporting to Parliament when a minister has awarded grants in their own electorate and any grants that which they've approved that officials recommended be rejected. So that's a good start. But I am yet to see movement on other necessary reforms to put an end to pork barrelling set out in legislation. Things like requiring all grant programs to have merit-based selection criteria and clear program guidelines. Hardly radical. So while this government may be quick to say they've enhanced accountability and transparency in grants administration, I continue to have real concerns about the current Labor government's administration of so-called election commitments, not to mention their $22.7 billion Future Made in Australia plans. The fourth integrity issue that has been seriously delayed under this government is an independent Parliamentary Standards Commission. The Australian people desperately want to see better behaviour in this place and consequences for those whose conduct fails to measure up, especially after a 2021 independent inquiry called out Parliament's revolting and humiliating workplace culture in the Set the Standards report. The author of that report, Kate Jenkins, recommended the establishment of an independent commission to investigate complaints against MPs, staff and other parliamentary workers and to determine punishments for serious breaches of workplace safety. But while work has happened behind the scenes, we are still waiting for legislation to be tabled. So if we are truly to improve the culture in this place, to set the culture at a high standard that the public rightly expect of the workplace that is at the heart of Australia's democracy, then a robust, independent Parliamentary Standards Commission must be implemented. Finally, we need to grade the Labor government on somewhat a novel subject, a subject that I didn't personally realise was an integrity issue until the 47th Parliament, Deputy Speaker. I'm talking about when the government requires stakeholders to sign non-disclosure agreements to provide feedback on exposure draft legislation or draft policies. Now, according to the Parliamentary Library, the Albanese government has used non-disclosure agreements on at least 9 occasions in this parliament, on important laws dealing with the NDIS, the environment, gambling and religious discrimination. Now, this means we don't know which lobbyists or powerful corporations are getting the inside word. It also means stakeholders are gagged when they have concerns on legislation. And this undoubtedly obstructs robust public debate. It means the laws that are introduced and passed in this place are not as good as they otherwise could be. They are incomplete at best and harmful at worst. So not only is this government dragging its feet on key integrity reforms, they're creating a whole new area for voters to be worried about when it comes to the integrity in government. And frankly, I didn't want to be any more worried. I may know better than most in this place that change is slow. The fight to establish the Anti-Corruption Commission took years of challenging and persistent conversations from many, many people and much negotiation. And it took courage to bring together an unlikely coalition, groups bold enough to demand better of government. But how much longer can voters be expected to see major party promises realised? Key promises like those I've listed tonight that have been made again and again with little to show for it. And I haven't even touched on other integrity issues like ending jobs for mates, much-needed lobbying reform and ensuring a robust freedom of information request system. So with an election less than 10 months away, I don't want to see the government recycle their election promises because they haven't delivered in their 3 years in power. It's simply not good enough. I'm sure voters agree with me, so I urge this government, in the time you have remaining of the 47th Parliament, make good on your promises and get moving.
And I thank, I thank the member for Indi for her contribution. The question is that grievances be noted, and I give the call to the member for Higgin.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, endometriosis is a really common disease. It affects 1 in 9 women, and diagnosis takes 7 years on average. That is far too long. It doesn't take 7 years to diagnose cancer. Patients also typically wait between 1 to 4 years to see a public specialist, like a gynecologist. Way too long, way too long. It's like adding insult to injury. I had the privilege recently of visiting one of the 22 endometriosis clinics that this Labor government has funded, something spearheaded by Assistant Minister Jed Carney. At the each endometriosis and pelvic pain clinic in Ringwood East, the wait time is not 4 years, but rather 14 days. The each clinic is a patient-centred clinic delivering essential services to women and girls who suffer from chronic pain. Patients walk in, often with wads, files of notes. Many of them have had years of surgeries, and they come in desperation, having wandered from pillar to post in search of answers. There is no cure for endometriosis, but there is care. Care to help women navigate their lives and find options that may enable them to remain productive and fulfilled and not be defined by pain. Using a multidisciplinary approach, patients are met with empathy and expertise. Such is the reputation of this clinic that patients from regional areas like Gippsland are coming through word of mouth. Medical and nursing consultations, counselling support, pelvic pain management, physiotherapy, dietetics, an on-site ultrasound, very unusual, and hormonal treatments, including Mirena insertion and removal. These are the services this clinic provides, and these are the services our Australian women need, not just in Ringwood East, but all throughout this country. It's something that we are pushing. The only ask from me from this clinic was for more space. What a good problem to have. They are so overwhelmed with business that they just need some money to expand the clinic. I would like to thank the clinic for its professional staff and for providing high quality care to our women and girls. Keep going. Deputy Speaker, bowel cancer. Bowel cancer is reaching down to younger and younger Australians. It is the reason we have expanded access to free bowel cancer screening to include people aged between 45 and 50. 1,716 Australians, each with a name, each with a story, each with loved ones, under the age of 50, are diagnosed with bowel cancer. That's 11% of all bowel cancers, and the numbers are accelerating. They are going up for a multiplicity of reasons. We are not clear why this is happening. 315 people under 50 die from bowel cancer each year. Imagine that. People at the peak of their lives. That's nearly 6% of all bowel cancer deaths. Over 86% of people diagnosed with early onset bowel cancer experience symptoms. So the majority of these patients actually have symptoms, and they go and see their doctor with them, often, sometimes with bleeding, a change in bowel habit, or pain. And yet, what do they hear? They hear, "You're too young to have bowel cancer." The signs and symptoms are attributed to hemorrhoids, to maybe food intolerance. It's a normal part of your recovery from having a baby, or it's the result of having a hectic lifestyle. How many times have these narratives been going round and round? And it's led to deaths, poor outcomes. And it's a tragedy, because if a polyp is found early, it's removed. It's snared through a colonoscopy and it's removed, gone. Bowel cancer stopped dead in its tracks. I'd like to thank Never Too Young, a bowel cancer patient advocacy group, for campaigning for the change to the bowel cancer screening program and spearheading this push for greater recognition. This Labor government, thanks to Mark Butler, the Health Minister, has listened. Deputy Speaker, aged care was a shambles when we came to office, defined by a Royal Commission report titled Neglected. Thanks to the reforms championed by Minister Annika Wells, we have seen time spent in direct care for patients, for residents, actually increase, and a whole range of other measures to increase the quality in aged care and restore confidence in the sector so that Australians, when the time comes for them to enter aged care, they know that they are going to be looked after, that there is oversight, and that there are now benchmarks that must be met so that they get the care they rightfully expect. Right now, residents are getting 204 total minutes of care, up more than 20 minutes per day from 2020-2021. We promised to ensure a registered nurse was on duty at all aged care homes 24/7. As of July this year, this has been achieved on average 99% of the time. That is remarkable. We were told it would never happen because of skill shortages. But you legislate, you create the benchmark, and this is the change. We said we'd establish a food, nutrition and dining hotline where older people in aged care homes, their families and carers can ask questions, get advice and make complaints about the food. This is available on 1800 844 044, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 p.m. We're funding 24,000 more home care packages to give older Australians more choice. It's pretty clear from the 2 years of consultation we have done with the community that Australians know what they want. they want to have autonomy. They want to have a say in what happens when they age. And ideally, they want to age at home with independence and a little bit of extra support. They do not want to end up in residential aged care if they can help it. So we're giving them some options. We've also changed deeming rates. Deeming rates are percentages set by the Australian government and used by Centrelink to predict how much you will earn over the next 12 months from things like super and investments. They provide an estimate of your income for the next year to work out if you are still eligible to the aged care pension. We are continuing to freeze Social Security deeming rates for a further 12 months to June of next year, 2025, to provide continued relief for around 876,000 income support recipients across Australia. The first 103,800 of your combined financial assets has a deem rate of 0.25% applied. Anything over that amount is deemed to earn 2.25%. In Higgins, this will support 2,815 income support recipients. Deputy Speaker, one of my favourite topics, career pathways and options for young people, for young Australians. The world is their oyster, and there are so many options. In fact, you are going to be spoilt for choice. Every student needs good career guidance to make informed decisions about their future. However, we all know, having been through school and even visiting schools, that quality of that career advice is often quite patchy in schools right across Australia. It doesn't matter whether you go to an independent school, private school, public school, a faith-based school, career advice remains patchy. So let me give you tips from an insider. If you're not thinking about energy, you're not thinking. Energy, energy, energy. 1, 2, and 3. Then, of course, there's the defence industries, the submarines, autonomous robots, hypersonics, counter-hypersonics, nuclear science, electronic warfare. Advanced manufacturing is coming. The world's most efficient solar panels are going to be made right here in Australia, backed by $1 billion from the Albanese Labor government. Green hydrogen projects, solar thermal. Solar thermal, this is where you have a column of salt and they're surrounded by mirrors and it melts the salt, it becomes a source of heat. Not science fiction, but projects that are already funded by us and underway. Quantum computing, then of course there's cyber. We need to raise an army of cyber defenders who can decode the noise and turn the hunted into the hunters. AI, anything related to the net zero transformation, transport, road aviation, agriculture, the built environment, circular economy. Waste is sexy because waste is now an industry and we want to learn to manage it and turn it into a resource. Future fuels, and then of course the care sector. We need people to care for each other, whether that be in teaching, nursing, social work, disability, mental health. And then, of course, there is construction. Without the human capital, we are not going to get to building 1.2 million homes, which is our ambition, over the next 5 years. We are going to need a lot of people in construction, blue collar and white collar. Young Australians have heeded the call. 500,000 have taken up fee-free TAFE courses already. And with that, we've got 20,000 places in construction, interest-free loans of up to $25,000, and if you complete, we will shave 20% off those loans, and there are incentives for apprentices as well as employers.
And I thank the member for Higgins. The question before the Federation Chamber is that grievances be noted, and I give the call to the member for Moore.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. In contributing to this grievance debate, my electorate of Moore is in Perth's northern coastal suburbs, a region experiencing rapid population growth. More than 10,000 new residents are projected to move into the outer metropolitan suburbs of Perth, to the north of my electorate, each and every year for the next 20 years. This places great strain on our community and sporting facilities, health care, aged care, and road network, as these new residents will utilise Joondalup as their closest regional city. Moore was once regarded as a safe blue ribbon seat for the Liberal Party. However, recent political events have prompted the Prime Minister to declare Moore as a target seat at the next election. For the electors of Moore, this is wonderful news, as their votes will now matter even more, and they will not be taken for granted. Increased federal funding for infrastructure is critical to fully realise the economic and community development potential of the Moore electorate. With a population of more than 165,000 residents, the city of Joondalup is the regional centre for health and medical services, higher education, digital innovation, cyber security, retail and professional services, with approximately 13,000 businesses generating more than $7 billion in annual economic activity. The sight of tower cranes in the Joondalup skyline is a sign of a vibrant economy. Throughout the city, construction activity will remain strong over the next few years, with major mixed-use residential and commercial projects commencing in Sorrento, Hillary's, and particularly at Ocean Reef Marina. To progress the growth and transformation of Joondalup, it is necessary to implement strategies to attract more public funding and private sector investment to build our city. The electors of Moore are looking forward to the future, where our regional city has the potential to grow into a vibrant metropolis with access to a wider range of professional services, amenities, and advanced technology, supporting highly skilled jobs for our suburban population. My priorities for our community include facilitating the development of an innovation precinct and expanding the existing education and health precincts to create skilled employment for residents. It is the role of the federal government to develop policy to promote innovative development and necessary funding support to deliver on this vision. My vision for an innovation precinct in Joondalup encompasses new and emergent technology and industries, including robotics, automation, artificial intelligence, data science, space, health and medical technology, defence, cybersecurity, and critical infrastructure. Developing an innovation precinct in Joondalup will pave the way for the construction of more office buildings in central Joondalup, creating activity and vibrancy in the city centre. Currently, there are several development-ready sites, such as the planned multi-storey office building on the corner of Grand Boulevard and Collier Pass, seeking an anchor tenant. To unlock the development potential of our city, increased federal infrastructure funding is required to upgrade our road network. I call upon the Albanese government to fund important local road infrastructure projects to better connect our suburbs to economic activity centres through projects including the grade separation of the Reed Highway and Arundel Road with a traffic bridge. Grade separation will facilitate free-flowing east-west traffic by eliminating yet another set of traffic signals, improving access to the Balcatta and Malaga industrial areas, Northlink, Perth Airport and beyond, for the many residents commuting to work each day, including some 11,000 FIFO workers. The realignment of Nangara Road and connection with Whitfords Avenue, this key road upgrade will unlock the local economic development potential of the Wangara industrial area, with more than 60,000 vehicles using the intersection each day, making the commute for more than 8,000 more residents safer and more direct. Traffic management at 5 dangerous intersections along Marmion Avenue, at Flinders Avenue, Seacrest Drive, Freeman Way, Beach Road and Karrinyup Road. The widening of Shenton Avenue near the entrance to the Joondalup Business Park and Lake Joondalup Baptist College, and a roundabout at Joondalup Drive and Lakeside Drive to improve the northern access to the Joondalup City Centre and Medical Precinct. Deputy Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, rapid population growth in our region means that there are unmet needs in healthcare. I'm proud to be part of a team which delivered $158 million in federal funding when we were in government towards a $256 million expansion currently under construction. Yet, inadequate provision has been made in the budget for future health facilities to meet anticipated population growth. This is short-sighted when we know that the population of the region is growing at the rate of 10,000 residents per year. It will only mean greater pressure on an already overstretched Joondalup hospital, with longer waiting times for patients, Federal funding needs to be committed to a new major health campus in Yanchep to alleviate the demand on Joondalup Hospital from rapidly growing outer metropolitan communities. There is also a compelling need to attract more specialist medical services to Joondalup Hospital. In terms of environmental infrastructure, Moore is home to the popular northern beaches of Perth. The 20-kilometre stretch from the city of Stirling to the city of Joondalup is utilised daily by thousands of local residents. Coastal erosion is a major problem at popular Metham's Pool and Waterman's Bay, where infrastructure, including access stairs and ramps, have been washed away and the beaches have become rocky. The dunes, footpath, public toilets, utilities and major infrastructure along West Coast Drive are at risk of erosion. In response, local government expends $600,000 annually in coastal erosion treatments, including sand renourishment, dune restoration and sandbagging at considerable expense to ratepayers. And in the longer term, we'll need to implement extremely costly, capital-intensive engineered measures such as artificial reefs, groins and seawalls. I call upon the government to urgently provide federal infrastructure funding to local government to protect coastal areas from the effects of climate change. Local government ratepayers should not be left to bear the full burden of implementing engineered coastal protection measures. To promote the national economic recovery, we must support continued investment in industry, with more than 11,000 more residents employed in the mining and energy sectors. I have consistently advocated for federal approvals for mining and resource projects and the use of gas as a transition fuel to cleaner energy, particularly in the maritime sector. With the cost of living dominating the national agenda, Australia's energy security must be at the forefront of the agenda, in particular, modern modular nuclear technology. More research needs to be done in relation to navigating the process of mapping out what would be required for commercial nuclear power plants and associated fuel facilities to be operating in Australia from the mid-2030s. Detailed analysis must be undertaken to appraise the costs of commercial modular nuclear power for Australia. The community needs to be consulted on the role that the latest nuclear technologies could safely play in our energy mix. Deputy Speaker, in summary, my grievance is that there is a significant gap in federal funding that our community requires to develop into a vibrant regional city. Many of my constituents have told me that they are financially worse off today than they were a year ago due to the rising cost of living, higher grocery prices, spiralling interest rates, skyrocketing electricity and gas costs. The focus of government needs to return to managing and growing the Australian economy. Increased federal infrastructure funding is critical to fully realise the economic and community development potential of the Moore electorate. And I call upon the Albanese government to invest in terms of federal funding to keep growing our community. Thank you.
And I thank the member for Moore. The question is that grievances be noted, and I give the call to the member for Robinson.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And the federal Labor government is committed to investing in infrastructure that supports our community on the Central Coast. Our government understands how vitally important it is that we are building the infrastructure, like roads, that help grow our region and create thousands of jobs. I'm particularly excited about the federal and state Labor government's $130 million partnership to upgrade Avoca Drive through Kincumber. This project includes widening Avoca Drive to 2 lanes in either direction, with improvements proposed to key intersections along this route. I made a commitment to the people of Robertson and the Central Coast that I would secure funding to address this traffic bottleneck. For too long, the community has had to endure lengthy delays during morning and afternoon peak periods. This has meant longer travel time for motorists, less time with family and friends, and major inconveniences for industry and small business that require efficient transport networks. The $130 million of funding is now being utilised by Transport for New South Wales, and the project is progressing successfully. Recently, Transport for New South Wales announced that the community consultation had opened for the $130 million project. The community are now invited to review the concept designs and provide feedback and submissions on their preferred options. I was able to attend an information drop-in session on Tuesday, August 6 at Kincumber Library. And here the community had the opportunity to meet with staff from Transport for New South Wales and review physical concept designs for the upgrade. And I can report that with the 2 drop-in sessions, they were an incredible success, with a large cross-section of the community participating in those drop-in sessions. And for those not able to make the drop-in sessions, community feedback can still be submitted via Transport for New South Wales website on the Avoca Drive upgrade project. Alternatively, interested residents can also email their feedback via the following email address: avocadr@transport.newsouthwales.gov.au, or by mail to the Avoca Drive upgrade project team at PO Box 2030, Newcastle, New South Wales 2030. The Central Coast community has up to Sunday, August 25 to provide feedback and a submission, and I strongly encourage the community to review the concept designs and select which option that they would prefer. The more of our community that has a say in this project, the better the outcomes of the upgrade will be. Every submission and piece of feedback that is received by Transport for New South Wales is carefully considered and helps staff factor in local knowledge, which again will improve the upgrade. I would also like to take this opportunity to update the Parliament on the federal Labor government's $40 million Central Coast Local Roads package. This funding was secured through my advocacy in partnership with the federal member for Doe Bell, the Honourable Assistant Minister Emma McBride, and this $40 million is now with the Central Coast Council and being utilised to upgrade 46 individual road projects over the next 4 years right across our great region. Already we have seen much-needed local road renewals take place at Rickard Road in Empire Bay, as well as along the scenic road at McMaster's Beach, with several more local roads to be renewed in this financial year alone, including the Esplanade at Ettalong Beach, Beach Street in Yamina Beach and Hillcrest Street in Terrigal. Securing this $40 million Central Coast Local Roads package was a significant win for the Central Coast, as previous federal members had neglected to invest in our region's local road infrastructure, consequently leaving behind deteriorated roads and traffic bottlenecks, leaving the Central Coast 10 years behind the rest of the state, if not the country. Deputy Speaker, the federal Labor government will never leave behind the Central Coast region like the previous federal member did. Just the other month, I welcomed Minister Kristy McBain to the Central Coast. The Minister and I highlighted the fact that our government will provide the Central Coast Council with $24.3 million through the Roads to Recovery program, which is an additional $10.5 million more over the next 5 years than what was provided by the previous federal Liberal government. Projects already delivered through the Roads to Recovery program in Robertson include pothole and surface repairs along Russell Street in East Gosford, with the overall investment being $950,556 funded by the Australian Government. Improvements to Vickery Road at Terrigal, an overall investment of $150,000 in federal funding, and further, more than $4.3 million is flowing to Central Coast Council under Phase 4 of the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure program, which builds on over $19.2 million committed under Phases 1 to 3. Future works include the patching and resurfacing of Wards Hill Road at Kilcare Heights from the Scenic Road to Maitland Bay Drive, this investment totalling over $749,000, and improvements to Davistown Road at Saratoga, an investment of over $203,000, both funded by the federal Labor government. Deputy Speaker, when it comes to road infrastructure on the Central Coast, I will always represent and advocate on behalf of my community. I encourage residents to contact my office should they wish to raise an issue or matters that affect their local roads. I frequently meet with residents to discuss the condition of local roads, and a recent example of that was when I met with residents at Nyoka Avenue in Point Clare. Residents of Nyoka Avenue contacted my office to raise their concerns about increasing volume of traffic passing through their street. Nyoka Avenue is narrow and services a local primary school, shops and a growing suburb. The driving conditions along the street are becoming unsafe, according to the residents, with many calling on the Central Coast Council to honour its 2019 plans to upgrade the street with curb and guttering and footpaths. I have written to Central Coast Council and request this action on behalf of the streets community. And similarly, I've also met with residents of Headlam Parade in Springfield, who are also experiencing challenges with their local road. Residents living along Headlam Parade are calling on Central Coast Council to address the drainage issues affecting the street. Due to the topography of the area, following weather events like persistent rain or major storms, runoff from the nearby mountain floods properties and causes significant damage. This is primarily because the street lacks curb and guttering and drainage. On this instance, I have again represented the residents of Headlam Parade and I have written to Central Coast Council requesting action to address these issues. Deputy Speaker, this federal Labor government will always invest in the infrastructure that grows our communities, improves safety and increases efficiency. And as the federal member for Robertson, I will always advocate and represent my community on any local road matter and issue. And just to touch on a few further points of what is occurring in the electorate of Robertson, where the Albanese Labor government has made a significant difference to people's lives. I'd just like to mention the Urgent Care Centre. The Urgent Care Centre was a significant signature policy piece that we took to the 2022 federal election, and I know that I, on many occasions, spoke about the Urgent Care Centre at press conferences, when door knocking and when phone banking. And it's a new model of care in Australia. It is a new model of care in Australia. If you're too sick for the GP, not sick enough for the emergency department, Deputy Speaker, now you have somewhere to go. And it is an outstanding model of care, particularly on the Central Coast, because we now have one in the south, in the electorate of Robertson, and we have one in the north, in the electorate of Dobell, with a state urgent care clinic smack bang in the middle in Long Jetty. These are not only assisting to ease the pressure on our emergency departments locally, but also too, they're making sure that people can access the care that they need when they need it. I've had countless residents email into the office, call into the office, even schedule a meeting to talk about their experiences, about how they have utilised the urgent care clinic, whether it be for minor infections, whether it be for broken bones that don't require surgery, just the application of plaster following some radiographic imaging, whether it is also making sure that people have the medications they need for an acute exacerbation of an acute illness not requiring an emergency department. Our urgent care clinics are making a difference on the Central Coast, but also too right across the country. I know that there are urgent care clinics further north and further south that are making a difference, and that's alongside some of our other signature health policies. I'm talking about the freezing of the PBS co-payment to make sure that medications are more affordable and cheaper for more Australians, making sure that people can get access to the medications when they need them for an affordable price, making sure that people can access longer scripts for those stable conditions when they need it. Because Australians know, I know everyone in this chamber knows it, but I'm going to say it again, and all Australians know that you can really only trust the Australian Labor Party to protect Medicare both now and into the future. We know that bulk billing, we know that making sure access to a doctor, that's the beating heart of Medicare. And I know, as the federal member for Robertson, along with everyone on this side of the chamber in the Australian Labor Party, we will continue to defend Medicare. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The question is that grievances be noted, and I call the member for Groom.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I'm going to speak this evening on the very topical issue of the CFMEU. I'd hoped to have added my contribution to the debate this evening. Sadly, the government saw fit to gag that particular debate. I'm not saying I have some particular great view, but I think there's something that I can add to this. Speaker, I'm going to tell a little story. My great-grandfather, this is my introduction to unionism as a family story. My great-grandfather ran a sheep run down near Delungra, northern New South Wales. He was in his 40s when one of the last sheep shearer strikes went on his property. Of course, there's a limited period in which you can do that. I'm sure the member for O'Connor is very, very aware of the restrictions that come to this. So when a strike takes place on your run, it's quite a thing. My great-grandfather, Claude Henry Everard Hamilton, decided that shearing work needed to be done, so he went and did it. And while he was doing it, the striking members of that particular union set upon him and beat him up. And when he got up from that, he went back to shearing. And he used to pass on a very clear message to us: there may well be strength in the union. There's a hell of a lot more strength in an individual who stand up to him. Yeah. And I say that loudly and proudly to anyone who's experienced the thuggery, the intimidation, the misogyny, and the outright violence that has been described by the CFMU. But, Speaker, to be completely fair, I want to talk about the full breadth of my experiences with the union as well. I've had the good pleasure of running mining and construction sites in Australia and around the world. I've been there in situations where people working for me have been injured, and I've been in that first responder situation with the guy working for me, and sitting side by side was the union representative, and a genuine level of care was being demonstrated. They were reaching out and making sure the family was okay and were contacted. I've been in reviews of fatalities on sites. I'm thinking particularly of one terrible one at the Ranger uranium mine, Speaker, where a practice that may well have been unsafe and needed review. We went through and we sat side by side with union representatives, and I think with their combined expertise of the workplace, they made a valuable contribution to that investigation. And so, Speaker, I think I think it's important to say this. My experience, having grown up on those sites, so I was first on a construction site at the age of 8. I've been standing and working side by side with union members for a hell of a long time. If you're genuinely looking after vulnerable workers, that's God's work, and I think there's a history in Australia that we can look back to and reflect on with some pride. So I say that, I make that contribution because I think it's fair to look at the full scope of unionism in Australia and its history. And I say that because I think it's very important to point out the behaviour of the CFMEU and say just how entirely unacceptable it has been to the Australian people, to people working on construction sites, mining sites, whatever it may be, around the country. It's completely against the Australian way of life, what we've seen. But to go through a brief history of this, sadly, what we saw, and the sort of incidents I talk about, the intimidation, the violence, this has not been a one-off. Sadly, if we look at a timeline of CFMEU activity, this has been a prolonged experience that many people, like my great-grandfather who chose to stand up to him, have suffered. And these aren't just accusations. This has been played out in the media. It's been played out here, reported here. It's been played out in our courts. Prosecutions have been made. Fines have been paid. We know this has happened. This is clear. The evidence is there. It's happened. But what was happening also through that period, Speaker, is that the CFMEU was making continuous donations to the Labor Party and involved intricately in determinations not just on policy, but on who elected representatives would be, playing a leading role, Speaker, in determining the shape and the future of the Labor Party all through this period, taking donations and shaping the Labor Party. And all that time, Speaker, members from the Liberal National Coalition have been calling this behaviour out, have been calling out that on one hand we've got this unacceptable, thuggish, violent behaviour taking place, and on the other hand we've got a Labor Party turning a blind eye whilst receiving donations. And that has been going on for decades. This has gone through this place here. People have stood up and called this out. And they've done it in state parliaments. They've done it in courthouses right throughout Australia. No one can deny this. But then suddenly something happens in July. Something so unacceptable to the Australian populace that finally, members of the Labor Party feel free to speak out. The accusations of high-level bikies and organised crime having got their hands all over CFMEU leadership. And this became unacceptable. And Speaker, at that point, we're supposed to believe Labor's claim that they had no idea. That everything that had happened, this was new to them. Suddenly the scales have fallen from their eyes and they see that this cancerous body now is a problem, and they're going to stand up to it. And Speaker, to claim ignorance over that period defies logic and belief. But Speaker, they came to the Parliament with a bill and told us that they were taking a tough stance, and they demanded we must absolutely support this bill no matter what. And we were told that every day we now delayed on this bill, we were somehow the cause of suffering, harm, further violence, further threats on workplaces throughout Australia. That was somehow supposed to be on us. After decades of ignoring it and taking their donations, millions of dollars of donations, somehow now these days are upon us. And they took such a tough stance on this, Speaker, such a tough stance that not a single Labor member rose to speak to the bill. Not a single one. That's how tough their stance was. Not a single Labor member rose to speak on it. And you've got to ask why. You know, it would be a cynic in me saying they didn't want to incriminate themselves and expose their links and their knowledge of what had been going on previously. But, Speaker, maybe the reason they didn't want to speak are the words on that tattoo. That God forgives, but the CFMEU doesn't. Maybe they didn't want to incur the future wrath of the CFMEU. Maybe they didn't want to say things that would one day get them disendorsed or one day see donation dollars pulled and somehow play out against them. Maybe that's the reason that they chose not to speak. There was a lineup of LNP speakers who wanted to speak and raise the concerns that have been brought to us by constituents in each of our electorates. I've got a thriving construction sector, Speaker, and every single one of them have raised these issues with me over and over again. You can just turn on the TV and see in Queensland what's going on at the moment. And the CFMEU's behaviour has been caught on camera multiple times. Their war with the AWU, what's playing out in Brisbane there at the moment is absolutely unforgivable. And I think, Speaker, you look at what's playing out in our construction sector, and I'd ask anyone involved, are you better off than you were before Labor came into government in this sector? Are you better off? And of course we're not. This lawlessness, this rampant violence, it's made the sector worse. It's made the sector worse. But the point of this is, Speaker, we are not here by accident. The situation we find ourselves in, the situation we find Australia's construction industry in, is not one of accident, it is one of design. The deliberate play-out of policies that this Labor government has enacted, and specifically the immediate abolition of the ABCC upon coming to government. The one body that was the watchdog of the construction industry. The body that was there to keep an eye on these unions and their behaviour, abolished. And what happened, of course? Was unions ran away with their power, and we find ourselves in the situation now. Things got worse. This is no accident of where we are. We had a bill put on the table that required 20 amendments to get bipartisan support. What a damning indictment. What a damning indictment on this government's failure to address CFMEU's unlawfulness.
The question is that grievances be noted, and I call the member for Hunter.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Today I want to take a moment to recognise some of the outstanding local businesses in the Hunter region and that do the Hunter region so proud. At the 29th Annual Regional Business Excellence Awards, several of our local businesses and entrepreneurs were celebrated for their exceptional service, innovative products and remarkable customer experiences. Branxton's own Balance Beans shone brightly, winning the award for customer service, whole businesses. They further cemented their success by receiving a highly commended in the professional services category as well. Clara Riddle from Supreme Sandstone in Quarraballong was deservedly highly commended in the Businesswoman of the Year category, showcasing her leadership and dedication. Hunter Valley Tours based in Bellbird, made us proud by taking home the award for access and inclusion, a testament to their commitment to accessibility. Outback Jess from Wood Rising was highly commended in the home-based business category, reflecting the strengths and innovation of homegrown enterprises. And finally, McCaffrey's Estate from Colburn was honoured with the award in the hospitality and tourism category, underscoring their excellence in showcasing the beauty of our region, the Hunter Valley. These awards are a testament to the hard work and dedication of all of our local businesses. Let's continue to support them as they thrive to contribute to the vibrancy of our community. Speaker, Business Singleton also recently held their 2024 Singleton Business Awards Gala presentation. I want to extend my congratulations to the winners from that night as well. Loop Organics was recognised for excellence in sustainability. Loop Organics had a great night, also taking out the top award of Business of the Year. Congratulations, guys. Keep up the great work. Loop Organics is an amazing local business that provides specialist organic waste and biosolids, beneficial use and consulting services. Loop recognises the inherent value of organic materials and the sustainability returns these to the earth. Congratulations on the award. The award for excellent innovation went to Morgan Engineering. Star Club Equestrian Program, Inc. was recognised in the category for excellence in diversity and inclusion. Buckyear Equine received an award for excellence in retail, and I must say, the business that also deserves the award for the best name of the night. Singleton Striders won the award, won their category for excellence in health, wellbeing and lifestyle. The Rotary Club of Singleton was rewarded as an outstanding community organisation, which is great to see. I'm in and out of Singleton quite regularly, and I always see the Rotary Club doing what they do and what they can for the community. Thank you for all you do. In recognition at the Business Awards night is truly well deserved for Rotary. In the category of excellence in professional services, the winner was Silverado Promotional Products. It's always great to see new businesses popping up around town, and it's even better when the community gets around them and supports them also. Well done to Halsey's Tinting, who won Outstanding New Business of the Year. I understand how hard it can be to start a new business, so I'm sure this win will feel especially gratifying knowing all your hard work is actually paying off. As everyone already knows, the Hunter is an amazing place to visit. It has everything you could ever dream of when you're looking for a holiday destination. There are so many small businesses and large businesses around our electorate in the Singleton local government area that help to make this part of the world so special. So I imagine the competition in the category for outstanding visitor experience was fierce. But Hollydean Estate Wines and Vines Restaurant must have stood out because they were announced the winner of this category. In the Hunter, we are grateful for our farmers and we are lucky to have so many of them. They provide us with everything we need from meat, milk, fruit, veg and all kinds of materials like wool. All of our farmers do a great job, but unfortunately there could only be one winner, and the winner of the category of excellence in agriculture went to Starline Alpaca Farm Stay. I've been lucky enough to attend that with my daughters, and it's a great place to go, so congratulations on the achievement there. Hunter Valley Elite Window Tinting was recognised for their excellence in micro-business. The night just kept getting better for Hollydean Estate Wines, Wines and Vines Restaurant, who went on to take out their second award of the night in the category for excellence in small business. It was also a great night for Morgan Engineering, who took out their second and third awards of the night by being recognised for excellence in large business and receiving the President's Award. Sounds like they may need a trailer to get their trophies home, Speaker. The People's Choice for Best Customer Service went to HSV Heaven. And the award for excellence in supporting the veteran community went to Singleton Defence Families and Community Inc. Congratulations to Dean Maney, who received an award for Employee of the Year, and Jess Stewart, who was announced as the Young Business Leader of the Year. Kudos also to Rachel Bygent, who took home Business Leader of the Year for businesses with 20 employees and over, and to Sky Vickers, who was the Business Leader of the Year for businesses with 20 employees and under. There was also a special recognition for business celebrating important milestones. Cox's Bakery celebrated 100 years. Singleton Neighbourhood Centre celebrated 50 years. Darracon celebrated 40 years. Singleton Pump and Water celebrated 40 years also. And Worn Out Wares celebrated 20 years. Local businesses play such an important role in our community in the Hunter, and you all deserve the recognition that you are now receiving. The Hunter has everything, wide range of categories that our local businesses were recognised in at these Business Excellence Awards really goes to show how lucky we are. Whether you're big or small, whether you're a new business or one that's already been a stable in the community, congratulations to all who won awards and that were highly commended in their categories. We're lucky to have you and I can't wait to visit more of you soon. Deputy Speaker, I had the privilege to attend the Lake Macquarie Business Excellence Awards recently as well. I'd like to extend my congratulations to Dynamic Business Technologies, who took home the award for Employer of Choice with 20 or fewer employees. Lake Group Strata was awarded Employee of Choice for the business with 21 or more employees. Flying Colours Education was recognised for excellence in the diversity and inclusion. Definitely won an award for excellence in innovation. The award for excellence in large business went to 8 at Trinity. Excellence in micro business was awarded to Anderson Pest Services. And excellence in small business was given to Design Anthology. Aware the Social Design Project took home the award for excellence in sustainability. Nathan Franks from Dynamic Business Team Technologies received the award for Outstanding Business Leader for business with 20 or fewer employees. Melanie Bird from Lake Group Strata won the award for Outstanding Business Leader for a business with 21 or more employees. Carter Home Project is recognised in the category for Outstanding Community Organisation. Alexander McCullen from Lakes Custom Computers received the award for Outstanding Employee. TeleThrive won the award for Outstanding New Business. Congratulations. Coast XP was recognised for Outstanding Visitor Experience. Jai Remington from Remington Legal was announced as the Outstanding Young Business Leader. The prestigious award of Business of the Year went to Dynamic Business Technologies. This topped off a great night for Dynamic Business Technologies and demonstrated that they are a good employer, helps business to succeed. 8 at Trinity also capped off a great night with the People's Choice Award. Well done, Keith and your team. I look forward to getting out there again soon and seeing you. It's a great night to celebrate these amazing businesses. My congratulations go out to all the finalists and winners. Cessnock Business Chamber recently held the 2024 Customer Service Awards at Cessnock Leagues Club. Congratulations to Luke Bozic from Home and Place, who was the winner of the Community Service Award, and to Casey Winter from the Community Kids Cessnock, who was a runner-up. Georgia Dembeck from Balloon Loft was the winner of the Celador Restaurant and Tourism Award. Ken Hutchison from Hanging Tree Wines was named runner-up. Sean McDonald from SM Built was named the winner of the Trade Award, and Isaac Baldwin from Baldwin Crisis Service was named runner-up. In the pubs, clubs and cafes category, Cass Ponchard from the Abermain Hotel was named the winner, and Leo Shivas was from Blue Leaf Cafe was named runner-up. Retail award went to Catherine Wilson from Baker's Delight, and Madeline Collins from Woolworths was the runner-up. In my favourite category, the health and beauty, Chris Underhall from Novas Aesthetics was named the winner, and Ebony Lee Earl from Ink and Tint Brow Artistry was named the runner-up. Kelly Redfern from Next Level Property Consulting was named the winner in the professional category, as well as Chelsea Marie Mordew from First Step Conveyancing as the runner-up. In the under-18s category, Bailey from Blanchie's on Leisure was the winner, and Lily from Lily's Local Services was the runner-up. The overall winner of the night was Chris Underhall from Novas Aesthetics. Congratulations to all the winners, and the Hunt is a wonderful place to be, and thank you for all you do as business owners with employing people in the Hunter and making sure that we can be the place we are. Thank you, and thank you, Deputy Speaker.
There being no further grievances, the debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for the next sitting. I call the member for Swan.
I move that the Federation Chamber do now adjourn.
Is the motion seconded?
I second the motion.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The Federation Chamber stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m. on Wednesday, the 21st of August, 2024.